Welcome to Fiction Audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, like and subscribing would be greatly appreciated. If you have any recommendations for novels, comment below.
Please join my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/fictionaudiobook.
Chapter 282. Have you ever seen hell? Find 50+ advanced chapters. And for more fan fiction. Backhand index pointing down. Support link, patreon.com/rioararyu. When Asher heard Scotty's soft voice, his mind buzzed, and everything went chaotic. He had never felt so uneasy, even once feeling like his life was almost over. Past experiences flashed through his mind like images, like a runaway film projector, and the joys and sorrows of his life reached a critical point at this moment. To be honest, Asher had felt a tiny, truly tiny, bit of happiness before. Because he hadn't expected Scotty to agree so easily. Perhaps his gaze and words had moved her. Or did she have her own considerations? But anyway, she agreed. A beautiful goddess had actually accepted his proposal. This was indeed something to be happy about. However, feeling countless eyes in the hall fall upon him, especially the calm gazes of the leading figures who seemed to be suppressing their emotions, Asher's tiny bit of happiness vanished. But seeing Scotty's lowered head at this moment, Asher found it hard to speak. Should he say now, "I was manipulated just now, what I said wasn't my true intention"? Wouldn't that be a direct slap in the face? No, since the original plan was for Scotty to propose to me, and then for me to reject her. Then if I explain now, it shouldn't matter, right? Thinking this, Asher immediately felt much more energized, his mind buzzing with thoughts. Meanwhile, at the round table, the kings looked at each other, then tacitly withdrew their gazes. Regrettable, this was truly regrettable. Unexpectedly, a goddess would actually propose to King Arthur. In that case, their daughters indeed had no chance. However, despite their regret, the kings all began to offer congratulations. Congratulations, King Arthur. Yes, congratulations. A goddess, truly enviable. While the kings were still wholeheartedly exclaiming about the perfect match between King Arthur and the goddess, some of them also noticed something amiss. It was simply too quiet, eerily quiet. Besides the few kings who were offering congratulations, everyone else remained silent. The knights of the round table stood stiffly in place, their expressions rigid, neither moving nor sitting, making the atmosphere particularly strange. Thus, the kings who had just been congratulating him also immediately fell silent. When the silence reached an extreme, Asher awoke from his thoughts. I need to smooth this over quickly. Although he thought this, when the words reached his mouth, he still couldn't say anything. The plan he and Scotty discussed earlier was just a simple plan, but after Scotty answered his words just now, the nature of it was completely different. When he proposed to Scotty, she actually accepted. If he were to explain now that he was actually manipulated earlier, he would probably be too embarrassed to face Scotty later. Just then, someone coughed lightly. Asher looked up, scanned the kings, and asked, "Is there anything else? If not, the meeting will end here today. King Arthur, I have a question I'd like to ask, if I may." A tribal chief stepped forward and said. This person was Bao's father. What was his name again? Never mind. Asher nodded and said, "Go ahead. Can what you just said to this goddess be understood as officially establishing her as queen?" Regarding the establishment of a queen, my esteemed teacher once said long ago that it would be more suitable after the age of 20, Asher said. Meaning, this is similar to dating before marriage, to deepen your understanding of each other. The tribal chief looked thoughtful. Asher forcibly maintained his composure and said with a smile, "Do you have anything else?" The tribal chief's mouth slightly opened, but before he could speak, Asher interrupted, "Oh, nothing else. Then I'll have someone escort you out." With that, Asher had someone come to the hall and escorted the kings away. Although they still wanted to inquire, upon sensing Asher's "be quiet" gaze, the tribal chiefs understood and said no more. It seemed that the matter of establishing a queen might not be settled so quickly. What? King Arthur proposed to a goddess? That's nothing. As long as a queen hasn't been officially established, nothing is set in stone. There's still a chance for everything. Now it's just a formal courtship between the two, a courtship, well, they've all been through it. They'd be embarrassed to call themselves chiefs if they didn't have 3 wives and 4 concubines at home. Perhaps in the end, the queen won't be the goddess. Thinking this, the kings' minds began to buzz with activity again. After Asher watched the tribal chiefs leave and withdrew his gaze, a voice spoke beside him, "King Arthur." A person stood beside Asher. It was Agravain. The other knights of the round table, besides Agravain, had already left the hall with the tribal chiefs. "What is it, Lord Agravain?" Asher asked. "King Arthur, were you serious about what you just said?" Agravain felt it was necessary to confirm King Arthur's intentions. He did not object to King Arthur and the goddess being together, but he needed to confirm if King Arthur was sincere. After all, if a divine being got angry, it would be a disaster for all of Britain. Moreover, Agravain genuinely felt that Artoria was more suitable for King Arthur, and it was certainly not just because his mother also supported it, but because he believed it himself. You will know about this later. Leave now, Agravain, Morgan interrupted Agravain. Her expression was calm, but this was a warning before an outburst. Agravain was completely oblivious. He shook his head and said seriously, I must have an answer now. Although King Arthur being with a goddess would be a beautiful story, it is also necessary to confirm whether King Arthur is sincere. Are you finished? Morgan asked softly. Not yet. He's finished, Imperial Sister, Artoria's calm voice came from the side. Agravain's voice finally stopped. He turned his head slightly, looked at Morgan, then at Artoria, and then scanned Scáthach and Scáthach. A strong sense of crisis suddenly screamed in his subconscious, as if saying, if you don't leave now, it'll be too late. I have something I want to discuss privately with King Arthur. Are you finished with your questions? Morgan asked again. Agravain subconsciously swallowed hard, then finally nodded heavily. I'll withdraw for now, King, he bowed slightly. Please take care. The hall doors slowly closed at Morgan's command, shadows gradually enveloping Asher. Finally, with a soft thud, the huge doors completely closed. Behind Asher, several gazes calmly watched his retreating back, their eyes revealing a deep, chilling intent. More bonus chapters. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Chapter 283, Chapter 283, Last Words. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. As the hall doors slowly closed, Asher's last glimmer of hope was also shut away. What to do, waiting online, it's urgent. Feeling the increasingly terrifying pressure from behind him, Asher secretly and anxiously calculated what would be the best course of action. Just then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Merlin, who was holding his staff and trying to sneak away. Asher immediately went up and patted Merlin's shoulder, saying with a smile, Merlin, where are you going? If he hadn't said anything, he would have almost forgotten. Looking at Merlin, wasn't he clearly feeling guilty and preparing to run away? Merlin stopped in his tracks, looked deeply at Asher, and slowly said, King Arthur, I have more important things to do. What just happened involves you, doesn't it? Asher asked succinctly. King Arthur, you mustn't accuse someone out of nowhere. Merlin gently tapped the ground with his staff. I was merely watching the show with Schadenfreude the entire time. I didn't do anything at all. Schadenfreude. Asher's lips twitched slightly, his eyes still full of doubt as he looked at Merlin. Besides Merlin, it seemed no one else could have manipulated him in that situation, right? It couldn't possibly be Odin, could it? No, impossible no matter how you think about it. That god seemed quite proper, completely different from this frivolous fellow in front of him. And Odin had no reason to do this. I really didn't do this. Merlin said again, indignantly. Merlin was indeed very innocent. Although he usually acted frivolously, and perhaps, possibly, might cause a little suspicion, this time it really wasn't him. What were you two mumbling about just now? Scotty, having walked up to Asher at some point, asked. Her eyes were calm, but also seemed to flicker with a hint of unease. From the moment she walked up, she hadn't looked at Asher once, keeping her gaze lowered. Asher, who had been full of suppressed frustration and didn't know how to vent it, looked at the goddess beside him, his mouth slightly opening, but then he closed it again. Looking at Merlin, could it be that it really wasn't him who did it? No, the problem now wasn't who the culprit was, but how best to explain what just happened. Thinking this, Asher secretly glanced at the few people quietly watching him from the other side. They were still sitting at the round table, completely motionless. But just their presence created an invisible pressure. Compared to worrying about being frozen into an ice sculpture by Scotty after explaining, Asher perhaps needed to worry more about being pinned to the round table and chopped up like a fish on a cutting board. I'm asking you a question again. Why are you suddenly silent? Scotty's voice came again, pulling Asher back to reality. Nothing, just asking Merlin a trivial little thing. Asher shook his head gently, then hesitated, and cautiously asked, by the way, you just now. He wanted to ask what Scotty was thinking when she answered just now. Was it really her own inner thoughts? If so, that would be too strange, his charm shouldn't be that great. Oh, you mean the proposal? Scotty seemed to realize something, then said with a slightly embarrassed smile, I just accidentally agreed. What do you mean, accidentally? Well, Scotty pressed a finger to her lips, tilted her head slightly in thought, then lightly patted Asher. You should know. Asher. What do I know? Are your idle talks finished? Just as Asher was about to continue asking, a voice from behind suddenly interrupted him. It was Morgan le Fay. She had finally lost her patience after seeing the three of them chatting endlessly. She stood up and looked at Asher with a smile. Asher's body trembled slightly. A strong sense of crisis spread through his heart. He instinctively turned to look at Merlin. As long as Merlin was still here, maybe he could shift the blame directly to him. However, before Asher could speak, he heard Morgan continue, "Merlin, you should have other matters to attend to, shouldn't you?" Merlin immediately nodded, then waved at Asher with a smug smile, "Then I'll be going, Arthur." "Ah. Don't worry, I'll come find you later," Merlin said, gently patting Asher's shoulder. "After all, I still have something to ask of you." Asher was startled. "You have something to ask of me?" "Yes, something very important." Merlin nodded solemnly, then hummed a tune and walked away. Very important indeed. Asher looked at Merlin's retreating back, a thoughtful expression on his face. Then, feeling the shadow gradually enveloping him from behind, Asher's expression turned grave. He looked at Morgan and Artoria, then at Scáthach and Scáthach, and said seriously, "I'm sorry, I've never seen Merlin's expression so solemn before. It seems what he asked of me is quite important, and I must attend to it now." With that, Asher turned to walk towards the main entrance, but Artoria immediately reached out and grabbed the back of his collar. "Wait a moment." Asher stopped helplessly, then stiffly turned his head like a robot. "Is there something you need, Lily?" Asher himself felt he had asked a completely pointless question. "You've decided, haven't you?" Artoria stared into Asher's eyes. "About the queen? Why ask such a question? Ash has already proposed, hasn't he? After all, Miss Scotty is a goddess." Scáthach said with a smile. "And she looks so much like Mother, it's perfectly normal for Ash to be moved." Asher's back was unconsciously covered in cold sweat. "Calm down, if I explain well, they'll definitely understand." Asher constantly tried to reassure himself. On the other side, Scáthach was about to continue speaking, but Scáthach raised her hand and touched her daughter's head, softly saying, "Calm down." Seeing Scáthach close her small mouth, Asher's heart filled with joy. Indeed, Shishou was still very rational. Asher felt hope, as if he had seen the light. He had just looked up at Scáthach when, in the next second, he saw his Shishou smile faintly at him and say, "Congratulations. When are you planning to get married?" "I'll prepare your gift in advance." Asher's expression gradually stiffened. "What's wrong? Do you have anything else to say, Ash?" Morgan asked with a smile. "It's fine, say whatever you want to say." It sounded like he was giving his last words. Asher muttered inwardly, feeling the gazes directed at him. Finally, he sighed and confessed everything that had happened earlier. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 Power Stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping Power Stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 284, Sisters in the Royal City. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. It was already night by the time the whole situation was finally explained. When the few people learned that Merlin was most likely the culprit who manipulated Asher, Merlin seemed to have been severely punished afterward. Merlin was still shouting, "It wasn't me," and similar things at the time, but Asher didn't have the energy to watch what exactly happened. Asher was currently dragging his heavy footsteps along the corridor towards his room, looking utterly exhausted as if he had undergone severe torture. Fortunately, this corridor led directly to Asher's room, and normally no attendants would enter, otherwise, seeing King Arthur in such a state, they might have thought he had suffered an attack. As Asher walked towards his room, a young girl quietly followed behind him. Asher had already noticed the girl behind him but paid her no mind, continuing towards his room. Eventually, the girl caught up to Asher and asked with concern, "Are you all right, Ash? What do you think, Lily?" Asher glanced at Artoria then averted his gaze, continuing to walk. Artoria had also participated in questioning him earlier. In fact, for a split second, Asher even thought the Artoria he saw was actually the Lion King summoned that day. If he hadn't forced himself to explain everything clearly this afternoon, Asher would probably be lazy, hung outside to dry by now. "I'm sorry," Artoria said with a very guilty expression. "I thought you were really proposing to Miss Scáthach. How could you possibly think I'd propose to her in such a public setting? But she also confessed to you. Didn't I just say? That was all a plan, just a plan." Asher emphasized twice. I know now. I need to apologize to you." Artoria nodded. Asher sighed inwardly and continued to walk, saying, "I forgive you. Go back and get some good rest." Artoria still didn't leave, but continued to follow silently beside Asher with her head lowered. Why does something feel off? Asher suddenly felt something wasn't right as he walked. Logically, under normal circumstances, Lily should have left by now, right? Why was she still following him? It looked as if she was preparing to enter the room with him. Could it be? Suddenly thinking of a possibility, Asher's body stiffened involuntarily. He slightly tilted his head and looked at Artoria. Her deep blue eyes were staring straight at his face, her eyes moist, and she was gently biting her lip. This won't do. It looks like Lily doesn't plan to leave tonight. But he had already arranged with Scáthach to meet Odin tonight, so he had to rest early. Besides, he was indeed very tired right now and really didn't have the energy for any more trouble. Asher slowly stopped and turned around, saying, "You go back and rest first, Lily." Artoria shook her head and said seriously, "I must ensure the king returns to his room safely." She continued, "Or are you too tired now and want to rest before leaving?" "No." Asher hesitated, then finally hardened his heart and said, I don't want to see you for a while." However, Artoria's expression remained calm, and she merely said, "Even so, I must ensure you return safely to your room. This is my duty." Asher. It seemed he couldn't drive her away. When Asher saw Artoria's calm demeanor and the occasional furtive glance she cast, he probably understood, tonight's ordeal was likely unavoidable. Time unknowingly passed into the latter half of the night. Asher lay in bed, looking as if he had lost all will to live. By the time the commotion ended, it was already late night. This was after Asher repeatedly emphasized that he wasn't feeling well today and wanted to rest early, which Artoria reluctantly agreed to. Then she held Asher's arm like a pillow and slowly fell asleep. Looking at the sleeping girl beside him, Asher couldn't help but sigh with emotion. If it weren't for his own experience, he truly couldn't imagine Lily having such immense stamina. But then again, she ate a lot normally, so good stamina was normal. I should rest early. It would be troublesome if Scotty couldn't wait to see Odin and then came running to my room. As he thought this, Asher was about to close his eyes and sleep, but immediately felt an inexplicable weight on him. Someone in the quilt lightly wiggled, and soon a charming face emerged from under the covers, gazing at him with a slight smile. "Sister Morgan, why are you here?" Asher tried his best to lower his voice, while secretly glancing at Artoria. "I came to apologize to you. I felt so guilty for misunderstanding you today. I never expected someone to have manipulated you," Morgan said, her soft body pressed completely against Asher. She slightly raised her head, her warm breath gently fanning his face, and continued, "So, big sister must apologize to you properly." "Asher. Where's my Shishou?" He tried to change the subject. On the way back from questioning Merlin, she ran into Scáthach, who took her into her room, saying she wanted to sleep with her dear mother. Morgan said, her lips close to Asher's, "Let's not talk about that. Big sister needs to apologize to you properly today." "No need. I want to get some good rest," he said, then secretly glanced at Artoria, who was still sound asleep beside him. Besides, Lily is still sleeping. Even without thinking, Asher knew what Morgan meant by apologize, but he was genuinely tired today, and he also had the task of letting Scotty meet Odin, so he really had no time for more trouble. "Lily." Morgan froze for a moment, then turned to look at the girl beside them. "That's right, it's better not to wake Lily. Let's talk about it next time," Asher nodded and said. Now, only by bringing Lily into it could he make Morgan restrain herself a little. However, Morgan merely said, "Never mind. We'll talk when Lily wakes up. Besides, I've already discussed it with her. After this, we don't need to worry about Lily's feelings anymore. After all, she's already done what she wanted to do and won't be like before. If she wakes up, we can just do it together." Asher. Whether it was their speaking too loudly or their heightened alertness, the next moment Asher fell silent. Artoria slowly opened her eyes. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 285, Chapter 285, We Need to Find Someone. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. Why are you so late? In the dream, as Asher opened his eyes, Scotty's figure immediately appeared before him. She observed Asher for a moment, her eyes filled with doubt, and said again, "Why do you look so tired? You don't usually seem this tired even during training, do you?" Asher calmly said, "After all, so many things happened today. You saw what I went through afterward, didn't you?" Remembering Asher being tortured in the afternoon, Scotty's lips involuntarily curved slightly, then she sighed with a tisk and said, "You deserved it. And I haven't even settled scores with you yet. Playing with a young and beautiful girl's feelings like that, if it weren't for the fact that you promised to let me see Odin tonight, you'd be an ice sculpture by now. Young and beautiful. Asher muttered, then subtly glanced at Scotty. Indeed, this woman was beautiful no matter how you looked at her, but it seemed to have nothing to do with youth, did it? Where's Odin? Didn't you say you'd let me see him? Scotty then asked. You'll see him soon, absolutely, Asher said, he'll definitely appear. Since the proposal he was controlled to say today wasn't Merlin's doing, then undoubtedly, it had to be Odin. Although he didn't know what that god wanted, it had to be him. If he guessed correctly, Odin would definitely appear today and explain what he wanted to do. Scotty looked at Asher in confusion. She wanted to ask why Asher was so certain, but before she could speak, the neigh of a horse came from a distance, a roar like thunder held in its mouth. A man rode Sleipnir from the sky and soon arrived before the two of them. A black robe fluttered gently in the wind, and the man lightly dismounted from the eight-legged steed. Scotty's gaze involuntarily fell upon Odin. Although she couldn't see his face, she could still feel a familiar aura. Scotty slowly took a step forward. Odin was also looking at her. Although he didn't speak, Scotty could feel the benevolent gaze. Scotty's mouth opened slightly, about to speak, but at that moment, the young man behind her indignantly said first, today's incident was your doing, wasn't it? You should know who he is, shouldn't you? How can you speak to him like that? Before Odin could speak, Scotty first turned to Asher, apologized quickly. Then, Scotty turned back to Odin and said, I apologize, this child is inexperienced and has no respect for gods, he's not singling you out. Asher actually wanted to retort that he was already grown up. But thinking about it, there was no need. Scotty seemed to be scolding him, but in reality, she was just protecting his safety. Although it wasn't necessary, it was better not to disappoint her good intentions at this moment. Odin gave Scotty a meaningful look and said leisurely, this seems to be the first time you've sided with an outsider, isn't it? You've really changed a lot. Scotty's cheeks suddenly flushed, and she glared at Odin annoyingly, please don't tease me. You should know that's impossible. Impossible? How is it impossible? Odin said with a smile, didn't he propose to you? That was. Scotty's voice became increasingly quiet, until finally, it was completely inaudible. That's proof of his love for you. Odin's voice rose a few decibels. Asher's forehead was lined with black. What exactly does this god want? To marry off his daughter? Never mind what Scotty is thinking, I'm already having enough headaches on my end. Odin never once looked at Asher, instead he said to Scotty, all right, I'm sure you have many questions for me, don't you? Let's go over there. He pointed to a large tree not far from the grass. So, the two walked under the big tree, under Asher's gaze. What exactly does this god want? Asher couldn't help but mutter. He just wants you to choose a queen and get married soon, to have that goddess he regards as a daughter marry you, but he doesn't consider your feelings at all. A voice suddenly came from beside him without warning. Asher turned to look, and Merlin was standing there at some point. You're still alive, Asher remarked. He had thought that Shishou and Sister Morgan should have delivered a fatal blow today. It seems they held back after confirming that the one who manipulated Asher's body wasn't Merlin. That god is truly outrageous. If I couldn't beat him, I would definitely help you teach him a good lesson, my respected king. Merlin said, pointing at Odin with righteous indignation. Speaking of this guy, as long as I'm asleep, he can always get into someone else's dream, can't he? Haha, you're really thoughtful, then, Asher said in a flat tone. Asher wasn't some naive young girl, he wouldn't be easily fooled by Merlin's sweet talk. Anyone could offer verbal help. It was his attitude today that was quite concerning. What do you want? Asher looked at Merlin warily. As the saying goes, a person who comes without being called has a hidden agenda. This white-haired mage was suddenly so eager today, he must be up to no good, absolutely. Merlin's smile faltered slightly, then he maintained his smile, King Arthur, what are you saying? I just came to visit you. Is that so? Then sit down. Asher said, then ignored Merlin and sat down on the spot. Merlin looked at Asher, then with a heave-ho, he sat down as well, looking at the two in the distance, and said leisurely, King Arthur, have you noticed? That goddess keeps glancing at us from time to time, Odin must be saying bad things. Oh, Asher said. Look, she seems a little flushed. Could it be that she's fallen for me? From a distance, an ice shard suddenly whistled past Merlin and Asher. Scotty glared coldly at them with an extremely fierce look. What does that have to do with me? Asher felt truly innocent. Merlin said a few words, and he had to suffer too. You should say less, I don't want her to hunt me down after I leave the dream, Asher said with extreme dissatisfaction. Sorry, I didn't think she could hear from that far, Merlin said with a smile. Perhaps she didn't hear, but just felt someone was speaking ill of her. Asher guessed. At that moment, the two on the other side seemed to have finished their conversation. Scotty looked satisfied and walked over to Asher, saying, "Thank you for your help this time. I'll rely on you in the future as well." Asher. Why does that sound like she's entrusting her entire life? And he remembered that he had only agreed to Scotty's request this one time, right? Does that mean he has to help in the future too, using his dream as a medium to let this goddess, whose age is now unknown, meet Odin? Glancing at Odin, who was smiling not far behind him, Asher replied perfunctorily, "We'll see later." "We'll see." Scotty's eyes narrowed slightly, meaning you plan to brush me off. "Yes, I do," Asher nodded. Completely unprepared for Asher's blunt answer, Scotty was left momentarily speechless. "We seem to have agreed before that I'd only let you see Odin once, right?" "I remember you proposed to me this afternoon," Scotty suddenly said. "All right, from now on, I am your wife. This way, helping your wife is a matter of course. Be grateful for the goddess's benevolence." Asher didn't look happy at all. Instead, the moment Scotty brought up the afternoon incident, he felt a headache coming on. "You should know that someone was playing tricks with what I said back then, right?" Asher asked Scotty. "Yes, but it's fine to just go with the flow. It's not a loss for you anyway, is it?" Scotty said faintly. "I think it's a pretty big loss," Asher said. "Huh?" She stared at Asher's eyes as if she had heard something unbelievable. "Are you saying I'm old?" "I didn't say that, you're too sensitive." Asher immediately shook his head and said, "Besides, the age of gods cannot be viewed from a human perspective." Scotty gazed intently at Asher for a long time again, and after confirming that he wasn't lying, a satisfied smile immediately appeared on her face. "You're quite clever, not bad. However, as a future husband, you still need to cultivate for a while. So why did I inexplicably become this goddess's fiancé?" "I'll trouble you again tomorrow." Scotty gently patted Asher's shoulder, then her fingers paused slightly. She thought for a moment, then added, "Never mind, let's wait a few more days. There's no rush anyway." Asher was right in front of her, could he possibly run away? "From now on, just cultivate well as my husband," she said, then stroked Asher's face and smiled softly. "You still look a bit young. Grow up quickly. I'm not interested in children, you know." After saying that, she left the dream under Asher's gaze. "I'm already an adult." Asher finally came to his senses after a while, muttering, "Take care, King Arthur's queen." Merlin waved his hand in the direction Scotty left, saying loudly, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Asher immediately raised his hand, intending to strike Merlin, but Merlin dodged with a flash, clicking his tongue. "You can't do that. As a king, you must have a calm mind. Losing your rationality over something like this won't do. My rationality says it really wants to punch you right now." "I didn't do anything," Merlin spread his hands innocently. "I merely spoke the truth. At this rate, you'll probably be married and have a queen in about a year and a half. Didn't the kings hear your confession back then?" "That was Odin's doing," Asher said, looking at Odin, who was walking over. "Oh, calm down, calm down. It's just one more queen. Why not have a few more queens?" Odin said with a smile. "I was much more open-minded when I was young. Has anyone said that there can only be one queen?" Asher's mouth twitched slightly. Although he didn't know much, he knew a little about Odin's deeds. "By the way, since you're still alive, what about your other children?" Asher suddenly asked. This had always been a confusion hidden in his heart, but he had never found a suitable opportunity to ask. Since Odin was still alive, did that mean that the Ragnarok in Norse mythology ultimately did not come? "They're still alive too," Odin said with a smile. "In my heart." Looking at the silent Asher, Odin's smile subsided slightly, and he continued, "Ragnarok, all gods will eventually die, and I found a way that could have allowed all gods to survive." Asher remained silent, just quietly listening to Odin's narration. Merlin, beside them, also said nothing. This man always carried a certain mystery, and at this moment, his face was devoid of any smile, his gaze deeply gazing at Odin. "But, in the end, I failed," Odin said softly. "This is fate, or rather, there was something that wanted fate to follow this trajectory, which is why it failed." Asher frowned, lost in thought. "Something that wants fate to follow a predetermined trajectory, that would be." Looking at Asher lost in thought, Odin suddenly asked, "Do you want to face the same experience in the end?" "What?" Asher asked subconsciously. "Haven't you noticed, Arthur?" Merlin spoke. "What do you think will happen to Britain if things continue like this?" Merlin then continued, "You should know the future historical developments, right? No, to be precise, you never belonged to this world." Merlin had told Artoria that no matter whether she pulled out the sword or not, Britain would eventually perish. And in that situation, the girl was still determined to pull out that sword. If Asher hadn't appeared, the current King Arthur would have been Artoria. But Asher pulled out that sword, and so the future changed. Merlin's clairvoyance could see the present and, based on what he saw, infer the future. But now, he could no longer infer the future development of this country. Do you know how this country will develop in the future? Merlin continued to ask. Asher finally realized something and turned to Merlin, saying, "Are you saying that the future has changed, and a certain entity will appear, and that entity wants this country to follow its original predetermined trajectory of demise?" "Guesses, these are all just guesses," Merlin shrugged. "Honestly, with my eyes, it's hard to see things that far, and it's difficult to infer them just by speculation." Asher fell into deep thought. After a moment, he asked, "Then what should I do?" "Do you still remember that dream you had before?" Odin asked. "That was you, after all." Asher turned to Odin, simultaneously recalling Jean's face. "To be precise, it wasn't me, but... In short, the person in France at that time wasn't you, you just need to think of it that way." "The person in France wasn't me, could it have been you instead?" Asher retorted, and then seeing Odin's subtle gaze, he couldn't help but ask, "It really was you?" Odin smiled, "After all, I am already dead. In reality, the person who should have appeared in France at that time should have been me, but we are one, so your appearance wouldn't violate the rules." "Simply put, you want me to have the same dream again?" Asher asked. Odin nodded silently. "Who do you want me to find?" Asher asked concisely. "Someone who can absolutely help us. That person is also a king, but has a bad temper. But rest assured, Arthur, he and I are old acquaintances. We're like brothers, as long as I say a few words, he's sure to help you," Merlin stated confidently from the side. "Someone who can absolutely help me." Asher was stunned. "Who are you talking about?" Merlin gave a mischievous smile. "Guess." "Tangerine boost this fanfic." Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 286, Chapter 286, Ishtar's car crash scene. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. In the dream. "Oh, by the way, did you tell my Shishou, Merlin?" Asher suddenly asked. Asher had only just remembered. Last time in France, he slept for several days, but that was too sudden and he had no preparation. This time was different, he already knew that he could autonomously choose to accept summons through dreams. However, before going to see the person Merlin mentioned, he still needed to inform Scáthach and the others, so they wouldn't worry too much. Yes, don't worry," Merlin said with a smile. "As a perfect magus, everything will naturally be prepared properly. Please rest assured." "Then, what's our destination?" Asher asked again. "You'll know when we get there." "No, you'll know in a moment." Merlin revealed a mysterious smile, but Asher still looked at Merlin disapprovingly. "You're not going to live stream this to my Shishou and the others again, are you?" "Oh dear, how could I?" "I swear I'm not that kind of person, King Arthur," Merlin laughed. "Don't you even believe my words?" Indeed, you are the most honest and trustworthy person in this world," Asher nodded. Merlin returned a helpless smile. "Even I can tell you're mocking me, Arthur," but he didn't care about Asher's words. Asher wasn't surprised either. It would be strange if Merlin cared about his sarcastic remarks. Half of Merlin's bloodline was that of a succubus, the court magus, who lived by devouring dreams, inherently grasped human emotions, but all his actions were merely imitations of humans. Ultimately, Merlin viewed everything in the world from an observer's perspective but could never truly empathize. He simply treated it as sustenance. "How do I find the person you're talking about?" Asher asked succinctly. "Don't worry about that, I'll take you there," Merlin said. "Are you that kind?" Asher's gaze towards Merlin was filled with suspicion, implying that if Merlin didn't tell the truth, he wouldn't leave. "I advise you to tell the truth, otherwise he will definitely not go. Even if he follows you, you wouldn't want him to slack off at crucial moments later, would you?" Odin suddenly spoke. "If it turns out that way, it would indeed be quite a headache for me," Merlin sighed. "I will also go along this time. If there's one more helper, the probability of saving the world will be greater." Saving the world. Asher simply sat down on the grass, looked up, and asked, "Do you ever help others?" "I can't help it, I actually quite dislike such things," Merlin spread his hands. "But this is my responsibility. Even if I'm unwilling, I must fulfill it. Besides me, there's no one else reliable." Merlin's clairvoyance could observe all things in the world, equivalent to being able to search for any information from home via the internet. But if this planet had no humans, then his clairvoyance would have nothing to observe. It's not like he could just look at the backyard every day, right? Even the most beautiful scenery gets tiresome after a while. Therefore, he had to stop the tragedy that was about to occur. He liked the beautiful stories depicted by humans. Although he couldn't experience them, he was captivated by the beauty of humans blooming like flowers and couldn't bear to see them wither tragically like flowers. This was the magus of flowers. But I alone am not enough, so I need your help, King Arthur. Merlin said with a serious face, the important task of saving the world can only be accomplished by you. In fact, I knew you were a malleable talent the first time I saw you. Asher wasn't fooled, immediately giving Merlin a look of disdain. You're just trying to trick me into being your laborer, aren't you? Even though it was Asher's clone that accepted the summons, the thought of Merlin trying to exploit him gave Asher an inexplicable sense of resistance. Merlin still refused to give up, instead leaning in closer, rubbing his hands and continuing to entice with a smiling face, but Asher remained unmoved. He merely looked at the grassland beside them, pretending to admire the scenery, and asked indifferently, "First, tell me clearly, who exactly are you asking me to find?" "Even if I told you, you probably wouldn't know," Merlin scratched his head. "It's that king who exists in the Epic of Gilgamesh, but it's not a normal world. You can call it a singularity. In fact, you've been to a singularity once before, you should still remember it." Asher froze, then slowly turned to look at Merlin. "What's wrong?" Merlin asked. Asher grabbed Merlin by the collar. "You just wanted to trick me into helping you, didn't you?" Merlin raised his hands, smiling, and comforted, Now, calm down, calm down. Look, my clairvoyance can't deduce your future, so you really do need a clairvoyance that can see through the future to help, don't you? Saving the world is just a side benefit. If you're unhappy, you can come back anytime, after all, it's just your clone that's been summoned." "No, it should be Odin's clone." Asher still looked at Merlin with suspicion. "He's not lying to you," Odin suddenly said. "I can vouch for that. If you don't believe him, do you not believe me?" "If it weren't for what you did before, I might believe you." Asher immediately glanced at Odin. "Ahem, that was for your own good." "Scotty is indeed quite good," Odin said, clearing his throat. Then, as if to change the subject, Odin said again, "So, what's your decision?" Asher, after a brief silence, quickly sighed. Merlin was right. If anyone could truly see his future and provide appropriate guidance, it would probably be that king. "I understand. How do I get to the singularity you mentioned?" Asher finally asked, as if giving up. "It's very, very simple." Merlin stood up very eagerly and came behind Asher, placing his hands on his shoulders. "You just need to close your eyes." Asher looked at Merlin with a mixture of doubt and belief, then closed his eyes. Odin looked at Sleipnir, the eight-legged horse next to him, and softly said, "This child is entrusted to you." Sleipnir raised its proud head and let out a neigh, then carried Asher on its back. "Take it with you. It will help you along the way," Odin's voice still echoed in his ears. Suddenly, the previous sounds quieted, and then Merlin's voice came from nearby, "We're here." Asher opened his eyes. Before him was no longer the grassland of the dream, but an ancient and grand palace. Feeling his clothes somewhat unfamiliar, Asher looked down at his attire. A long black robe, riding the white steed Sleipnir, it seemed he was in a rider class. "No, wait, is this Saber?" Feeling the changes in his body, Asher roughly understood. It was exactly the same feeling as the last time in France. Clearly, this was the sensation of manifesting after answering a heroic spirit summons. But the focus now wasn't that. He had listened to Merlin's advice and accepted the summons to this world, with the fundamental purpose of hoping Gilgamesh could give him some guidance. So he had to greet the king who summoned him first. "Servant Asher," obeying Ma. Before Asher could finish, Merlin pulled his wrist. "The king has fainted. Quick, come help." Asher froze for a moment. As Merlin pulled him closer to the throne in the great hall, he finally clearly saw the men before him. The Shishou who had summoned him, and Merlin was now leaning on the throne, looking as if he was merely resting his eyes. However, when Merlin gently touched Gilgamesh's shoulder, the king's head tilted and fell onto the throne. The servants Gilgamesh summoned required his own magical energy to construct their spiritual foundations. Unlike modern summoning rituals, the ritual Gilgamesh used was arguably more orthodox. These servants were almost indistinguishable from having complete physical bodies. Perhaps because of this, the amount of magical energy consumed was quite large. Additionally, this king had never known what fatigue was, and the accumulated exhaustion finally erupted completely when he summoned Merlin and Asher, almost kicking the bucket and meeting the goddess of the underworld. What's going on?" Asher couldn't help but murmur to himself. Just then, a beautiful veiled woman behind him sighed softly. Although her face was obscured, her gentle eyes alone indicated she was a charming woman. Siduri, the priestess who assisted the wise king of Uruk. She stepped forward, then calmly turned to speak a few words to a subordinate who came to report, then approached Asher, bowed slightly, and respectfully said, "Please, leave it to me." Asher and Merlin instinctively moved aside, and as they watched Siduri expertly treat Gilgamesh, Asher couldn't help but exclaim, "How practiced." Yes, judging by Siduri's calm expression, it was probably not the first time she had treated Gilgamesh, which was likely why she was so composed at the moment. After all, she was used to it. Oh, the king almost died suddenly again. I see, I'll go treat him now. It was pretty much like that. The two patiently waited for Siduri to finish her treatment. She turned and softly said, "If possible, please let the king rest for a moment. He will wake up before sunset." Although it was a bit regrettable not to hear Gilgamesh's pleasant, booming laughter, Asher understood well, so he said, "Understood, thank you for your hard work, Lady Priestess." Siduri nodded slightly, "I'll take you two to rest first." With that, Siduri led the two out of the great hall, and after settling Merlin and Asher, she withdrew. He still had to wait for Gilgamesh to wake up. Asher sat on a stone chair, lost in thought for a moment, then turned to look at Merlin next to him, only to find Merlin leisurely sitting on a stone chair, seemingly quite at ease. Asher stood up. Merlin asked in surprise, "Are you going out? The king might wake up soon, you know." "Just going for a stroll, and don't worry," Asher pointed to the white-winged horse that had appeared out of nowhere, with Sleipnir. "I can come back whenever I want." This was Odin's steed. There was no place in this world it couldn't reach, not even the underworld. "All right then, go ahead, but remember to come back early." Merlin waved his hand, and Asher left the room. Riding the white Pegasus, Asher effortlessly soared into the sky. He gazed at the ancient city, then looked north. In the distance, a tall, imposing wall stood, looking magnificent. That was the Northern Wall, or also known as the Absolute Demonic Front. "I can't believe I ended up in a place like this," Asher sighed, lying on Sleipnir's back. This era wasn't a normal age of gods from the Nasuverse, it was a singularity, the Absolute Demonic Front Babylonia. This was a place with a predetermined outcome. Asher hadn't expected Merlin to trick him into coming to such a place. No, he couldn't call it a trick, after all, he had come knowingly. And he wasn't powerless now, perhaps he could even turn the tide of the battle. Asher could feel his strength, it wasn't just his own, but also a part of Odin's magical energy. With such power, he could do something if he put his mind to it. "Before Gilgamesh wakes up, I'll go scout the area first." Asher gently patted Sleipnir's head. The white Pegasus seemed to possess intelligence, spreading its ethereal light wings and flying towards the northern wall. "It's quite pleasant, isn't it? I wish this horse could manifest in Britain too." Asher squinted, enjoying the warm breeze in midair, gazing at the gradually approaching northern wall, and softly said, "Faster, let's go see how many demonic beasts are outside." Sleipnir let out a neigh, sped up, and swiftly darted towards the northern wall, reaching it before he knew it. After circling around, Asher instructed Sleipnir to head back towards the palace. Earlier, outside that high wall, he did see quite a few demonic beasts lurking, but not as many as he had imagined. Perhaps the demonic beasts also needed rest or something. Anyway, he had a rough understanding of the environment here, and Gilgamesh should be waking up soon, so it was probably better to go back and wait. Thinking this, Asher rode Sleipnir back towards the palace. Just then, a whistling sound suddenly reached his ears. Had the wind suddenly picked up? As Asher thought this, a woman's scream came from high in the sky, "You there, get out of my way." By the time Asher looked up, it was already too late. He saw an extremely revealingly dressed woman riding some kind of flying contraption diving towards him from high in the sky. Accompanied by the woman's screams and the incredibly fast dive, Asher had no time to dodge. But he was very calm, merely spreading his hands. "If you can get hit by someone flying on a horse in the sky, what else can I do?" Boom. With a loud bang, Asher and the unidentified woman crashed heavily to the ground together, instantly raising a cloud of dust. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 Power Stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping Power Stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 287, Long Time No See. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. The traffic in this country is too unsafe, even flying in the sky is this dangerous. Feeling a sharp pain in the back of his head, Asher muttered, rubbing his forehead. Then he glanced at the white horse, which was covered in dust from the fall, its beautiful white fur now stained with a lot of mud. My horse. Asher looked at Sleipnir with heartache. Although he knew its injuries weren't serious, seeing it so dirty still pained him. Are you all right? He walked over and gently stroked Sleipnir, then used runic script to slowly heal Sleipnir's injuries. Fortunately, the injuries weren't severe. With the light of healing enveloping it, Sleipnir gradually regained its spirits. I'm so sorry. If I had dodged earlier, you wouldn't have gotten hurt, Asher said to Sleipnir, and the white Pegasus, as if understanding human speech, let out a soft neigh, indicating that it was fine. Just then, the mysterious woman beside them slowly got up from the ground, holding her head, somewhat dazed. It's too late for apologies now, human. I told you to get out of the way just now, didn't I? The mysterious woman slowly stood up, holding her forehead, pushed back the long hair from her back, looked up, and glared at the person who had just been involved in a major car crash with her. But seeing as you're sincerely apologizing, her voice suddenly stopped, as if she was startled. Then, she looked down at herself, then at Asher who was carefully comforting his mount. Anger gradually welled up in her originally bewildered red eyes, and a vein seemed to throb on her forehead. Asher immediately reacted, his heart sinking. In his concern for his beloved horse just now, he had completely forgotten the culprit behind this car crash scene. Asher gently patted Sleipnir, causing it to transform into light particles and vanish before his eyes, before looking up at the woman again. From her attire, this mysterious woman was dressed very revealingly, almost as if she were only wearing underwear. She had beautiful black hair and red eyes that were as clear as gems. This was the goddess Ishtar, the goddess of beauty, harvest, and battle in Mesopotamian mythology, and also the most beloved by the gods. You scoundrel. At this moment, Ishtar's black hair behind her seemed to spread out like seaweed due to some powerful aura, and her red eyes seemed to burn with fury. Calm down, calm down. Asher tried to appease the goddess. It had to be said, despite her highly revealing attire, the aura Ishtar exuded at this moment was enough to inspire awe. If Asher hadn't regularly faced such domineering goddesses, he probably would have been intimidated by a few points already. Hitting someone and then going to check on your mount first, what an ill-mannered fellow. You hit me first, didn't you? Asher actually wanted to say this after hearing Ishtar's words, but offending a goddess right after arriving in this world was clearly unwise. So he changed the subject and said, were you rushing earlier? Or did you not control that thing well? He pointed to the flying boat behind Ishtar. Exclamation point. Ishtar's eyes widened slightly, her cheeks flushed instantly, then she buried her head, her hands unconsciously clenching. Then, she quickly walked up to Asher, one hand on her hip, slightly raised her proud chin, brought her beautiful face close to Asher, stared intently at him, and said, word by word, I was merely distracted thinking about other things, there was no such thing as not controlling the flying boat well, leading to a car crash. Furthermore, if you hadn't been foolishly standing there, I would have landed safely by now. Also, my flying boat piloting skills are among the best in the world. Do you understand? Ishtar's excited demeanor made Asher feel as if he just said, I don't understand, she would kill him to silence him. However, such an attitude actually exposed the truth long ago, this goddess was really slow to catch on. Asher suppressed a smile, nodded earnestly, and said, I understand, I apologize, it was my fault just now. Ishtar then nodded in satisfaction, a smile blossoming on her face, you actually understand quite well. Asher didn't want to stay there any longer, so he said, if there's nothing else, I'll be going. With that, Asher turned to leave. Ishtar's smile faded. With her arms crossed, she gazed at Asher, who was about to leave, and called out, stop. Asher stopped in his tracks and turned to look. Is there something else, Lady Goddess? Oh, you know I'm a goddess. Even though you're just a servant who was just summoned by that guy, right? Ishtar's eyes narrowed slightly, observing Asher carefully. Then, she slightly tilted her proud chin, as if a god looking down on a human, and stepped forward again towards Asher. It's all your fault for blocking my way just now, you made me lose something very important in that collision. You have to compensate me now. Asher. Why did that sound like a hooligan on the street hitting someone and then claiming injury to demand money from the victim? What are you talking about? Asher asked, maintaining his composure. Well, Ishtar thought for a moment, then raised a slender finger, something that you'd know, this thing is amazing, just by looking at it. I don't think you, looking so impoverished, have the means to compensate me, so you'll help me find it. That way, the goddess will forgive your rudeness just now. Why don't you just say you want a free laborer? Asher was speechless. Now, being able to help the great goddess is your good fortune. Ishtar suddenly acted very familiar, patting Asher heartily on the shoulder. I haven't agreed to help yet. Asher muttered. After all, he was just a heroic spirit summoned by Gilgamesh, just a clone. Although his original body could feel everything his clone could feel, the point of him coming to this era wasn't to help this goddess find that thing that sounded so baffling. So, you're not going to help? Ishtar's eyes narrowed slightly. She hadn't originally intended to bother a servant so much, but seeing his mount changed her mind. If this guy could help search while riding that horse, the success rate of finding it might greatly increase. Looking at her, if he didn't agree, she would probably pester him endlessly. Asher sighed inwardly, then said, "You might as well explain clearly what you want me to find, right?" Ishtar immediately broke into a charming smile. "You're quite clever, aren't you?" "Very good, very good. Since fate has brought us together, I'll give you this opportunity to assist the great goddess." There were too many things to pick apart, making Asher momentarily unsure where to start, but Ishtar continued, "What I'm looking for is the bull of heaven, Gugalana. It doesn't matter if you don't know what it looks like, as long as you have a rough idea of what you're looking for." "Ah, I understand. I'll try my best to find it," Asher said. He figured he'd just placate her for now. It looked like she had been searching for a long time, and since the goddess herself hadn't found it, it probably wouldn't matter if he didn't either. He just needed to slack off. Ishtar stared into Asher's eyes, as if seeing through his thoughts, and with a slight curl of her lips, said, "If you find it, I can let you use it for a day or two, you know. By the way, with this thing, mere demonic beasts are nothing. One attack can destroy all of them." Asher's eyes lit up slightly, then he looked at Ishtar with suspicion. "Aren't you afraid I'll run away if I find the bull of heaven?" "You can try if you think you can," Ishtar said with great confidence. "If that really happens, I will hunt you down to the ends of the earth." "I understand. I will try my best to find the divine beast you mentioned," Asher said, nodding. Ishtar finally withdrew her gaze in satisfaction. Then, as if remembering something, she added a reminder, "Also, remember to be careful. Not every goddess is as easygoing as I am. If you encounter the other two goddesses, it's best to ride your horse and run with all your might." "Did you hear me?" "I heard you," Asher replied, then murmured to himself, "The three-goddess alliance, huh? You heard it clearly, didn't you?" Ishtar mused over Asher's previous words. Then, as if something occurred to her, her cheeks suddenly flushed, and she quickly added, "By the way, I hope you don't misunderstand. I'm not reminding you to be careful because I care or anything like that. I'm just reminding you because you still have to help me find something, understood?" It was originally just a simple reminder, but Ishtar managed to make it sound increasingly misunderstood. Should he call her the incompetent goddess? Asher inwardly complained, but his expression remained calm as he nodded. "Here, take this. If anything happens, just pour your magical energy into it, and I'll come find you immediately." Ishtar took out something resembling a small pebble. "What is this?" Asher asked curiously, taking the pebble Ishtar offered. "Simply put, it's something like a communication device. As soon as you pour magical energy into it, I'll immediately know your location and come to you right away." Ishtar paused slightly, then suddenly showed a somewhat embarrassed expression, coughing lightly. Actually, it would work better with gems or something for communication, but gems are quite valuable, so." "No, what are you making me say? Idiot." Ishtar suddenly glared at Asher in annoyance again. "Asher. Hadn't she said all that herself? All right, I'm leaving now. If I find that you haven't been helping to search for that thing in a few days, you're dead," Ishtar said, then got back on her flying boat. Finally, she gave Asher a meaningful look. "Actually, I quite dislike the aura emanating from you, but I've decided to give you a chance to prove yourself. Do your best." "What aura?" Asher subconsciously asked. "The underworld." Ishtar glanced back at Asher, got on her flying boat, and vanished with a whoosh. The aura of the underworld. That's quite normal. After all, he had the blessing of the goddess of death on him, and now Asher had integrated Odin's magical energy into his white dragon furnace heart. As a chief god, it's not strange for him to have an aura similar to death. After seeing Ishtar leave, Asher summoned Sleipnir and then returned to Uruk. As soon as he entered the room, Asher was pulled by Merlin towards the Great Hall. He knew without thinking that Gilgamesh must have woken up. "Honestly, the king has been awake for a while now. Lady Priestess just came to ask me where the other servant accompanying me went, and I didn't know how to answer her," Merlin said in a very complaining tone. "You can explain it clearly to King Gilgamesh yourself later." Asher was also helpless. He didn't want this either. Who knew that these days you could even get into a car crash while flying in the sky? If this were modern times, Ishtar's driver's license would have been revoked. Arriving at the Great Hall, Gilgamesh was leaning on his throne, looking down at the two below. When he asked why Asher and Merlin were so late, Asher began to explain his afternoon's encounter. After hearing Asher's explanation, Gilgamesh fell silent, just staring at the black-robed youth below him. The wide black hood almost covered half of his face. Someone who didn't know might think he was an assassin. After watching for a moment, Gilgamesh suddenly let out a joyous laugh that echoed through the hall. "Ha ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. Siduri, did you hear that? This servant actually crashed into that goddess while on patrol, ha 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 ha. I am greatly pleased now, ha 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 ha." On the throne, Gilgamesh laughed uncontrollably as if he had taken laughing gas, seemingly genuinely amused. He covered his abdomen with one hand, still saying things like, "Are you trying to make me laugh myself to death?" Siduri closed her eyes slightly, maintaining her composure, seemingly accustomed to this scene. It wasn't until a while later that Gilgamesh stopped laughing and then asked in a serious tone, "What do you think of that goddess you encountered?" "Quite at Sundara." Asher then added, "I mean, she seemed a bit slow to catch on, like she was a bit dense." "Dense?" Gilgamesh repeated, then let out another joyous laugh. "Very apartment. But that's not what I'm asking. What do you think of her strength?" Asher shook his head. "I don't know, I didn't see her fight. But since she's a god, she probably won't be too weak. After that, you might face stronger gods. Are you confident you can resist them?" Asher shook his head. Gilgamesh raised an eyebrow slightly, about to speak, but before he could, he heard Asher continue, "I'll do my best." "Do your best, huh?" Gilgamesh looked deeply at Asher, then ignored him. "Siduri, continue with the next administrative matter." Asher looked at Gilgamesh, who had immediately returned to work, and did not speak again. Although he really wanted to ask about clairvoyance now, Gilgamesh's magical energy clearly couldn't be wasted on such matters, because Gilgamesh now looked a bit weak. Clearly, this wise king had probably performed another summoning ritual immediately after waking up, which was why he was in this state. He'd have to ask about clairvoyance later. Asher didn't linger in the Great Hall and turned to leave. Merlin seemed to have something else to do and didn't leave immediately, remaining in the Great Hall. It wasn't until Asher had left the Great Hall for a while that Merlin slowly sauntered out. "Oh dear, that king certainly knows how to boss people around. He just manifested and immediately ordered me to undertake a mission," Merlin said, looking troubled. "Where to?" Asher asked. "He told me to find a clay tablet," Merlin sighed. "I envy you. Because you're strong, you can stay and resist demonic beasts, while I can only run errands." Heh. Asher gave Merlin a smug smile. He didn't believe someone with grand class qualifications could be that weak. But then again, it was just Merlin's clone here now, so it was normal for him to be a bit weaker. "Oh, by the way, before you go back to your room, do you want to meet someone first?" Merlin clapped his head, as if remembering something, and suddenly spoke. "Gilgamesh just said that among the servants summoned this time, one manifested because they wanted to see you, and afterwards inquired about your whereabouts." "Want to see me?" Asher wondered, which servant? Asher felt he didn't know any servants, did he? It couldn't be those people from Britain, could it? That seemed unlikely. After all, those people should be unsummonable. "How would I know who it is?" Merlin spread his hands innocently, then said, "We'll go and see now." So, guided by a servant who had appeared at some point, the two unconsciously arrived at a certain building, and then stopped in front of the second-to-last room in the corner. Go on, go see who it is," Merlin said with a smile, pushing Asher. Asher walked forward, pulled back the curtain, and the woman sitting at the head of the bed looked up. After a brief surprise, a smile appeared on her face, and she extended her hand towards Asher. "Long time no see, Ash." The golden braided hair shimmered with a captivating luster in the setting sun. "Tangerine boost this fanfic." Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 288, Mordred. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. Night quietly descended, accompanied by the clinking of glasses. A group of people drained their cups. Beside them, King Leonidas I seemed to be drunk, now flailing about in a drunken frenzy. Merlin held a wine glass in one hand and rested the other on Asher's shoulder, burping at him, appearing as close as old friends who hadn't seen each other in years. Asher easily restrained Merlin. Perhaps due to his drunkenness, the runes easily bound Merlin to the ground, where he wriggled like a maggot. "Isn't that a bit too much? He seems to be your court mage, right?" Jean sat down beside Asher, holding her wine glass. Whether it was her high alcohol tolerance or simply not drinking much, everyone else in the room was sprawled out, while only she and Asher remained sober. "It's fine, don't worry too much about that guy." Asher glanced at the undignified Merlin, who was clutching his stomach, then averted his gaze. "More importantly, I want to know, how did you end up here?" "About that, I'm actually not sure," Jean replied with a helpless smile. "I seem to have been summoned as a lancer." "A lancer, huh?" Asher murmured. "That class isn't very safe. Among the lancers summoned throughout history, very few survived to the end." Asher didn't know if it was a cursed class or simply a matter of bad luck. Jean murmured, "Is that so?" then shook her head and smiled. "I hear the king is still summoning the last servant." "I hope we can get along well," Asher said. "But it didn't really matter anyway. The person standing here now could be said not to be Asher himself, but rather an existence infused with Odin's magic. This meant that even if he offended a servant, he wouldn't have to worry about them holding a grudge against him in the future. After all, what did Odin offending someone have to do with Asher? Oh, right, it's your turn to answer now, isn't it? How did you end up here? Jean's voice pulled Asher back to reality. She looked at Asher a few times, then continued, also, your spiritual core seems different from when you appeared last time. It's a bit complicated to explain, Asher nodded gently, not denying it. It wasn't a secret that needed to be hidden anyway. Seeing that Asher had no intention of explaining, Jean simply smiled and didn't press the matter. Smart women always knew what was appropriate. Although she considered herself not very smart, she understood this much. Were you summoned just this afternoon? Asher picked up his wine glass and took a sip, glancing at the sprawling servants around him. Except for the last servant Jean mentioned who hadn't been summoned yet, all other servants were currently present. Jean nodded, then briefly explained what had happened that afternoon. After that, the two chatted for a while about being summoned to this world. However, Jean seemed distinctly distracted, her fingers nervously stroking the rim of her wine glass, her eyelids lowered, a blush appearing on her face that was either from the wine or shyness, looking as if she had something to say but couldn't. She would occasionally steal glances at Asher's lips, and in her mind, the bold act she had performed before leaving France surfaced. What's wrong? Asher noticed Jean's embarrassment and asked in confusion. Nothing. Jean immediately replied. I see, Asher simply smiled and didn't press the matter. Although it was clear that Jean had some unspeakable difficulty, since she didn't want to talk about it, he wouldn't ask for now. The two sat there in the room, until a moment later, Jean seemed to make up her mind and turned to Asher. Oh, right, since you remember me, that means you remember everything that happened before, right? Asher hesitated for a moment, then finally nodded. I do remember everything, including that last kiss. His words were cut short by the extremely embarrassed girl. That was just something I did because I was provoked by that woman at the time. Don't take it seriously. Asher was stunned, turning to look at Jean. He saw the saintess's pupils slightly wide, as if she had heard something utterly shameful that made her blood rush. Her voice immediately rose a few octaves, and her previous calmness was gone from her face. She looked full of momentum, as if saying, say one more word and I'll cut you down. Asher was stunned for a moment, then nodded silently, then let's just say that's what it was. Jean breathed a sigh of relief at his words, but soon, as if remembering something else, her brow furrowed slightly, and she muttered to herself, but it's also annoying if you don't take it seriously at all. Indeed, that was her first kiss. If the other person didn't care about it at all, it would make her feel very unhappy. Speaking of which, this fish is too passive, isn't he? Even Jean, a young girl who used to spend most of her time in the countryside, knew, upon hearing her explanation, that at this point, one should hold the girl's hand and say, how could I forget something so important? Then say some sweet nothings, and then sit together on the walls of Uruk, leaning against each other's shoulders, looking up at the starry sky, talking about ideals, and so on. Speaking of which, this kind of thing can be done now, right? Anyway, this fish is so passive, even if she takes the initiative to do something, he probably won't resist. After all, he seems to be the type of person with strong adaptability. The saintess was a bold person, so as soon as this thought popped into her head, she immediately prepared to act on it. She first coughed lightly, then peeked at Asher, then silently moved closer to his side, and then secretly peeked at his expression. However, because his face was mostly hidden by the wide black robe, she couldn't see his face at all. Jean hesitated for a moment, then couldn't help but ask, why are you wearing these clothes? Asher was puzzled. After noticing Jean's gaze, he understood what she meant and immediately said with a smile, are you talking about the clothes? This belongs to a certain god. This time, I was summoned in his identity. I see, Jean said with a faint smile. Their shoulders had unknowingly touched. Despite the layer of fabric, she could still feel the girl's skin. Asher froze, instinctively glanced at Jean, then silently averted his gaze. Is this tacit approval? Unable to see Asher's face clearly, Jean could only judge from his actions. She tried to slow her heartbeat, then reached out, intending to place her hand on Asher's. Ah, how annoying. That king is so bossy, and keeps calling people bastards. It's really pissing me off. By the way, why is it so quiet here? Is the party over? As that disgruntled voice sounded, Jean almost electrically withdrew her hand, clasping it lightly into a fist before her mouth as she lightly coughed to hide her shyness. Then, she looked up at the culprit who had disturbed her and Asher's wonderful night. It was a rather dashing girl, dressed casually. The girl now entered the room swaggering like a big boss, with her jacket slung over her shoulder, then shook her neat single ponytail, found a random chair, and sat down. Her golden hair remained bright even in the night. Is this the last servant Gilgamesh summoned? Jean. whispered to Asher, looking curiously at the girl before her. But the young man beside her remained silent for a long time, which made Jean turn to him in confusion, only to see him clearly wavering. Under the hood of his black robe, those golden eyes held an expression of disbelief. Mordred. Asher blurted out almost instinctively. Hearing her true name, Mordred couldn't help but turn to Asher in confusion. She threw her jacket onto the table, then tilted her head and asked, "Who are you? Do you know me?" Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 Power Stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping Power Stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 289, Chapter 289, I Am Your Father. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. Asher looked at the young girl before him with a rather subtle expression. He never expected to meet the girl in this way. Mordred, she was one of the Knights of the Round Table, the rebellious knight who ended the legend of King Arthur, and also the homunculus created by Morgan le Fay using Artoria. That's how the story should have gone, but Asher had originally pulled the sword in the stone under orders, and everything went as Morgan wished. Naturally, Morgan had no reason to create another homunculus to oppose Artoria. But this didn't mean that Mordred wouldn't be born. Because the current Mordred was very likely born as a homunculus. Did you hear me? Hey. Perhaps because Asher hadn't answered for a long time, the naturally impatient girl slammed the table. The wine on the table rippled, reflecting the dim glow of the candlelight. Looking at Asher, who was completely lost in thought, Jean also looked over in confusion, then her mouth slightly opened. Ash. Asher immediately reacted, clamping his hand over Jean's mouth, then looked back at Mordred, saying in a low voice, "I have the ability to discern true names." Discern true names? Mordred raised an eyebrow, then grinned. That's quite an impressive ability. Never mind that, everyone here is pretty drunk. Come have a few drinks with me, otherwise, I won't be able to sleep tonight. After saying that, she casually strode over and sat beside Asher, crossing her legs and turning to look at Jean beside her. After observing her for a few moments, she muttered to herself, "She looks so much like Mother." Looks so much like Mother, does that mean I'm Mother, and Asher is father? Jean's eyes widened slightly, a flicker in her gaze, but she quickly calmed down, gently pushed away Asher's hand, and remained silent. Asher secretly breathed a sigh of relief when he saw this. It looked like Jean had understood his meaning. "Here, for you." Just then, a wine glass appeared out of nowhere. It was the wine Mordred had just poured for him. Then she poured herself another glass. Cheers. Without a word, she clinked her glass against Asher's, then downed it in one gulp, slamming the glass heavily on the table with a satisfied sigh. "That's refreshing. I recall you're still underage, aren't you? Is it all right to drink?" Asher calmly took a sip of his wine. "I am underage, but so what?" Mordred revealed a triumphant smile. "As long as no one finds out, nothing will happen. Don't let this fool you, I used to secretly drink when I was very young, hiding it from father." Asher's eyebrows twitched slightly. "This brat. This is Miss Jean beside me. You said she looks a lot like your mother. I'm quite curious, who is your mother?" After introducing the girl beside him, Asher tentatively asked. Mordred glanced at Asher, then poured herself another glass of wine. "No harm in telling you. She was King Arthur's wife. Later, father felt being king was too tiring, so he passed the throne to her," Mordred said softly, taking a sip of wine. "As for her name, I don't want to tell you." "Why?" Mordred looked Asher up and down, then annoyedly scratched her head. "I just don't want to, no reason." Perhaps the previous question made Mordred a bit irritated, or perhaps shy. She shook her hair and poured another glass of wine. "Come on, another toast." After saying that, she was again the first to down her wine. Asher took another small sip of wine, pondering who Mordred's mother could be. Probably Sister Morgan, or Lily. At this moment, Jean, beside him, looked at Asher, then at Mordred. She opened her mouth several times, wanting to speak, but the words caught in her throat and she swallowed them back. Jean remembered what Gil had said before. Back in France, the servant Gil had summoned was a mature female named King Arthur, and that female clearly had a very close relationship with Asher. From this, it could be deduced that he very likely had a close relationship with King Arthur. And this girl claimed King Arthur was her mother. Could it be that Asher was Mordred's father? Mordred picked up her glass and took another sip, then looked around at the messy food, muttering to herself, if Mother were here, she'd definitely pig out. Asher froze, already knowing who Mordred's mother was. Mordred was right, the food was indeed incredibly delicious. If Lily were here, it's likely everyone else would be drunk and passed out while she was still quietly eating. If Lily saw this scene, she'd probably complain about him hogging the food. Just as Asher thought this, he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't help but look outside. Could it be that Merlin guy is live streaming again? It shouldn't be. Merlin said he definitely wouldn't do that again. How could he not keep his promise? Wait a minute, can Merlin's words be trusted? Could it be that a group of people are watching a live stream right now? As this possibility crossed his mind, Asher felt a cold sweat break out on his back. Not to mention Jean's intimate gesture just now, just Mordred alone was headache-inducing enough. What's wrong? Jean poured Asher a drink, then looked at him with a knowing gaze. Even this girl from the countryside, no matter how innocent, couldn't possibly be unaware of what Asher was spacing out about. Undoubtedly, the reason for his daze was this newly arrived knight of the Round Table, Mordred. I'm fine. Asher came back to his senses. Mordred beside him again clinked her glass with his. Then, she looked at the wine glass in Asher's hand and frowned. You can't even finish one glass. It's the same glass as before, and it hasn't been touched. I can drink it, I was just thinking. Asher drained his glass, then looked at Mordred, who was contentedly pouring him more wine, and hesitated slightly. Mordred, I have something to tell you. Finally, he spoke, as if having made up his mind. What is it? Just say it directly, Mordred said carelessly, taking a sip of wine. I might be your father. Puffed. Mordred nearly choked on her wine. She coughed hard, and Jean beside her helped pat her back, making it difficult for her to catch her breath. You scoundrel, how dare you make such a joke? Even if we were summoned by the same person, don't blame me if I lay hands on you. Mordred looked genuinely angry. She glared at the men in the black robe, looking like a furious lioness. I'm quite serious, Asher said. You bastard, still daring to say such things, Mordred finally erupted in rage. She reached out, intending to grab Asher's robe. Boom. Just then, a violent crashing sound suddenly came from outside. Asher abruptly looked up. The sound came from Gilgamesh's divine tower. Let's go see. Asher immediately stood up and left the room, with Jean following closely behind. Mordred glanced at the two, scoffed, annoyed, and scratched her hair, then followed them out. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 290, it really is Father. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. Boom. With a loud bang, a huge hole appeared above the throne room. A slender woman descended from the sky. She brushed aside her beautiful black hair and sat on a flying boat, looking down at Gilgamesh with deep mockery in her eyes. She said, You look even weaker than last time, Gilgamesh. Although you just said many disrespectful things to the goddess, if you sincerely apologize and offer treasures, perhaps the goddess can forgive your actions. It's Lady Ishtar, everyone retreat, quick retreat. The soldiers of Uruk cried out in fear, and then the soldiers guarding the entrance of the throne room retreated one after another. That was a goddess, and a very beautiful goddess, there was no doubt about that. But in the eyes of these soldiers, the goddess was only beautiful in the face. This goddess's personality was truly unruly, and if they were cursed by the goddess because of it, it would be a loss, so they chose to retreat immediately. Ha, someone actually wants me, the stupidest fool in the world, to sincerely apologize, how interesting. Gilgamesh remained high on his throne, looking back at Ishtar with crossed legs, then casually withdrew his gaze. The stupidest fool in the world should be you, that flashy bastard. I originally wanted to torment you slowly, but now I've changed my mind. Ishtar's eyes seemed to burn with inextinguishable rage. Oh. But Gilgamesh seemed to remember something interesting, and the corner of his mouth slightly lifted. The servant I summoned previously reported to me that he violently crashed into an incompetent goddess while patrolling in midair. Unable to control your only flying boat, crashing around everywhere, what is that if not a fool? Oh, perhaps it was intentional, wanting to go cry and act spoiled to your father, God Anu. Mongrel. The air in the hall seemed to freeze suddenly. Ishtar buried her head, and some terrifying aura seemed to emanate from her body. Congratulations, you have now successfully angered me. Ishtar revealed a charming smile. Since there are no other attendants here, I'll let you sleep here forever. Ha, do you really think so, Ishtar? Gilgamesh revealed an arrogant smile and said to the empty hall, What are you still waiting for, gods from other pantheons? Let's teach this incompetent goddess who still doesn't know her purpose a lesson together. After Gilgamesh finished speaking, there was still no sound. Ishtar pouted, A charlatan, just wait to kneel before the goddess and confess your sins. Whoosh. At this moment, a spear came from behind in the distance, but Ishtar reacted quickly and easily dodged the attack. She immediately turned her head, her beautiful red eyes slightly narrowed. Is there really someone not afraid of death coming to protect this stupid king? So it's you. Ishtar's gaze solidified on Asher, who was walking into the hall. Beside him were Mordred carrying a greatsword and Jean holding a spear. Is this guy flying in the sky an enemy? Leave him to me. Mordred looked impatient, and her armor enveloped her as she stepped forward. Calm down, the opponent is a goddess, don't be so impatient. Asher timely raised his hand and pressed Mordred's shoulder, stopping her. Don't touch me, do you want to be beaten up by me? Mordred slapped Asher's hand away. Asher's mouth twitched slightly and he said, I'm your father. Someone who doesn't even know what my face looks like dares to call himself my father, I will defeat you on the honor of a knight. Quiet down now. Asher finally got angry. It was one thing to be suppressed by Sister Morgan and Shishou normally, but if he couldn't even control his own daughter, wouldn't he really become lazy? You dare to lose your temper with me? Mordred raised her head, full of anger, and then, she suddenly froze. Those eyes, so familiar. Let me handle it. Asher glanced at Mordred and stepped forward. Where's your knight's honor? Jean saw the previously angry girl suddenly become so quiet and couldn't help but ask in a low voice. Ha ha ha. In fact, as a knight, I'm only a third-rate knight, and I don't care about honor or anything. Mordred laughed heartily. Jean. Not playing by the rules was quite similar to Asher. However, that look just now was really similar to father's. Mordred stared at the figure in front of her and muttered, could it really be father? On the other side, Ishtar looked at Asher walking towards her. After gazing at his black robe for a moment, a long sword gradually appeared in her hand. You really intend to stand with that stupid king, don't you? In that case, I'll eliminate you both. Ishtar rode her flying boat and swooped down towards Asher, her splendid golden sword slashing down at him. I've never stood on your side. Clang. As Asher complained, a pleasant sound of weapons colliding rang out. Ishtar only saw a magnificent sword appear before her eyes, but only the hilt was visible, not the blade. Obviously, the other party used some means to hide the blade. Whoosh. Asher wielded the sword of promised victory, deflecting Ishtar's sword, and then stabbed at Ishtar. So dangerous. Ishtar's eyes widened slightly, and she immediately ducked. The sword grazed her shoulder, and just when Ishtar thought she had avoided it, the sword horizontally slashed down at an extremely tricky angle. You really look quite disheveled, Ishtar. Gilgamesh still leisurely sat on his throne, looking down at the goddess below and slowly said. Ishtar rolled awkwardly, but felt a startling chill from behind. The black-robed youth had appeared behind her at some point, his feet on the stone pillars of the temple. Starting from him, several ice cones swept towards her along the ground. Ishtar raised her eyes full of anger. Once or twice was fine, but constantly being defeated made her feel very embarrassed, especially being mocked by that flashy guy sitting on the throne, which made Ishtar even angrier. She aimed her bow and arrow towards Asher, and the bow and arrow, imbued with some magic, glowed with dazzling light. Repent properly for laying hands on a goddess, you fool. A beam of light blasted towards Asher, but Ishtar only saw him thrust his sword into the ground and raise his palm. Isn't this guy a saber? He actually abandoned his sword, what is he thinking? Ishtar thought to herself. But soon, Asher answered her question. When he put down his weapon, his magic surged even faster than before. Dozens of ice walls appeared, and runic characters strengthened the ice wall's defense. The huge light cannon and the ice walls collided fiercely, raising a strong wind. The light cannon quickly broke through the first, second, and even third ice walls, finally stopping at the 13th. Ishtar raised her finger and flicked several small light spheres towards Asher, but Asher easily dodged them. He lightly stepped onto a stone pillar. Ishtar's expression finally became much more serious. She looked up at the young man in front of her and muttered to herself, is this guy really a servant? Although she had intentionally reduced the destructive power of her bow and arrow because she was worried about damaging the temple, being so easily blocked by the other party was still unexpected. This guy is really strong. Although he likes to tease others, his strength is really good. Mordred's helmet came off, and an excited smile appeared on her face. It wasn't until the howling wind caused by the collision of the light cannon and the ice wall ended that she looked up and muttered. I wonder how the battle is going now. However, when Mordred looked up, her previous smile slightly stiffened. Her eyes slowly widened, reflecting the slender figure standing quietly on the stone pillar. At this moment, Asher stood on the stone pillar in an extremely unscientific manner, his entire body completely off the ground. His wide black hood was blown back by the wind, revealing the young man's face beneath. Short black hair, a body that had undergone dragonification due to battle, and those eyes that were as bright as day, gleaming golden. In this world, only her father could strengthen his body to this extent. He replaced the former Tyrant King, becoming the new Tyrant King, and was also King Arthur, who replaced his mother in pulling the sword in the stone and ruling Britain. It really is father. Mordred murmured. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 291, Chapter 291, this is the underworld. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. He's really your father. Jean looked somewhat subtly at the young man who was still fighting fiercely with Ishtar. To be honest, if she hadn't known the girl named Artoria, she would have found it difficult to connect this seemingly immature young man with the role of father. There's no mistake, how could I mistake something like this? Mordred pouted. I used to cling to father a lot, how could I forget what his face looks like? As she said this, she turned her head and looked at Jean a few more times. Who are you? You seemed very close to my father just now. Jean's mouth slightly opened, but she couldn't say anything for a long time. She didn't know how to introduce herself for a moment. Nice to meet you, I'm Jean, you can also call me Jean Dark, or I wouldn't mind if you called me Mom. At this moment, a horse's neigh came from a distance, attracting both of their attention. Ishtar was clearly at a disadvantage. On one hand, she was concerned about the divine tower and didn't use large-scale noble phantasms. On the other hand, she didn't intend to kill, which led to her repeated defeats. At this moment, she rode her flying boat to the damaged ceiling, while Asher on the other side had summoned Sleipnir, always on guard against Ishtar's attack. What's wrong, Ishtar, are you going to flee with your tail between your legs? Gilgamesh leaned on his throne, looking up at Ishtar. You've really given this king a very good show, a goddess who aggressively attacked the hall is beaten and flees in shame. Siduri, later write on this king's clay tablet, Ishtar nearly made this king die of laughter with her comical murder attempt. Siduri slightly closed her eyes, unsure if she heard him. You all just wait, you're lucky this time, I'll spare your lives for now. Ishtar swept her fierce gaze across everyone in the hall, snorted coldly, and finally her gaze lingered on Asher for a moment, saying, You wait too. After speaking, she flew away through the hole in the ceiling on her flying boat. Asher watched Ishtar leave, gently patted Sleipnir's head, and only when it disappeared did he sigh helplessly in his heart. He had originally thought he could ease his relationship with the goddess by looking for the bull of heaven, but after tonight's fight, he probably had already been targeted by Ishtar. What a useless goddess who only causes trouble. You did very well this time, Asher. The king above the hall said. Asher looked at Gilgamesh in surprise. He was clearly not using his own identity when he was summoned, but he was still seen through. Put away your meaningless surprise. I know why you came to see this king. Go back and rest first, after all. Gilgamesh glanced at Mordred, who looked like she wanted to go say hello but also seemed a bit shy, and the corner of his mouth slightly lifted. You also have other matters to attend to. Following Gilgamesh's gaze, Asher immediately understood his meaning and rubbed his forehead as if he had a headache. How to put it, seeing his future child appear before him at such an age, his mood was quite subtle. Speaking of which, was Gilgamesh really intentional? Why did he summon Mordred so coincidentally? Or was it because he was here that Mordred could be summoned? Siduri, report the upcoming political activities. Gilgamesh's voice sounded in Asher's ear. Without thinking, he knew that this king was going to work overtime again. Asher turned and left the hall. As he passed the entrance, he tilted his head and said to Mordred, Let's go. The usually boisterous girl was uncharacteristically awkward, her face slightly red as she scratched the back of her head. What are you still spacing out for? Are you thinking about whether to go for a couple more drinks later? Asher asked with a hint of teasing in his voice. No. I never drink, Father Hiccup. Mordred unexpectedly let out a burp while refuting. She immediately covered her mouth, and then, noticing Asher's gaze, she hugged her head in annoyance, remembering what had happened at the gathering place earlier. Oh God, what did she just tell Father? She just told Father that she had been secretly drinking. While Mordred was still regretting her recent talkativeness, Asher had already stepped out of the Great Hall. She glanced at the figure in front of her and finally stepped to follow him. Jean, seeing this scene, couldn't help but reveal a knowing smile. From an outsider's perspective, it was quite interesting. After all, she had just seen how carefree this seemingly somewhat rash girl was, but after learning Asher's identity, she immediately became so submissive. It was quite amusing. Oh, of course, the fact that Ash and that girl named Artoria had a child in the future, that was not amusing at all. Jean lowered her eyes, her usual bright eyes seeming to dim considerably. She really didn't want to steal someone's love. On the other side, Mordred had quickly caught up with Asher's pace, walking shoulder to shoulder with him. Her armor was still on, but her helmet had been removed. She opened her mouth several times, but even with a flushed face, she still couldn't speak, only secretly glancing at her father, whom she had always admired. What's wrong? Being so reserved suddenly isn't like you. You were quite uninhibited when you were drinking earlier. When Asher's voice came, Mordred twitched like an irritated cat, then bravely raised her head to look at Asher. After their black eyes met for a moment, she suddenly froze. Father, why do you look so young? After all, I just came of age this year. I didn't expect to meet you in this era. Asher shrugged. I probably disappointed you by not showing the mature side you imagined. Mordred, however, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief and grinned. Not at all, you're still father, no matter what. It seems the tactic of changing the subject worked. Mordred secretly rejoiced in her heart. By the way, father, why are you in this era? Did you know I was here and specifically came to find me? Mordred asked curiously. I can't do that much. Asher shook his head. Don't be modest, father, you must have seen through everything and came to find me. Mordred grinned, revealing a cute canine tooth. Asher couldn't help but glance at the sunbright smile on Mordred's face. That canine tooth, it seems to be inherited from Sister Morgan. Although Morgan usually acted like a mature older sister, she indeed had canine teeth, which made Asher a bit curious why Mordred inherited Morgan's canine teeth. Father, what are you thinking? Mordred asked. Nothing, I have something I want to ask you. Asher slowed his pace slightly and turned to look at Mordred. Mordred was startled. What is it? As a child, did you get the ideal life you wanted? Of course, I'm very happy. Mordred rarely showed a somewhat shy smile. There's only one regret I haven't fulfilled yet. What regret? Well. Mordred rubbed the golden hair on her forehead with her fingertips, looked up, then glanced at Asher, seeming a bit embarrassed. I can't say for now. Then tell me when you want to. Asher smiled and did not press the issue. Sensing Asher's gentle gaze, Mordred looked awkwardly away, clasping her hands behind her head, pretending to look at the scenery. Then, when she noticed Asher withdrawing his gaze, she secretly looked at Asher again. Father is really young at this time. Although Mordred had seen Asher look young in the past, that was only because the power of a god had fixed his appearance, just like Scáthach and Scotty. Sister. But Asher at this time looked even younger than Mordred remembered. No wonder so many people liked father. That soft, gentle-looking face really attracted the affection of mature women. By the way, how old were you when you started drinking? Just as Mordred was still staring at Asher, thinking about these random things, Asher's voice suddenly came again. He stopped, turned his head, and asked. Mordred froze, then chuckled and turned her face away. Red. When that seemingly not majestic voice came again, Mordred lowered her head as if frustrated. When I was 10, I saw you drinking and was hesitant whether to try it. At that time, in order to become the best child in Asher's eyes, Mordred showed what a good child should be like, at least in front of Asher. Therefore, she was very hesitant about drinking. And then you drank? No. Later, Agravain saw me and said, if you want to drink, just try it, everything has to have a precedent. Mordred raised her head and said. It's not hard to imagine Agravain, with his gloomy expression, passing by Asher's room and seeing Mordred hesitating whether to secretly try alcohol, and then encouraging her with a somewhat sinister smile. I see, so it was Agravain. Asher smiled. Perhaps he doesn't have enough work to do, that's why he has time for leisure. Mordred looked at Asher's smile and shivered for no reason. Then she remained silent, acting like a, yes, I'm a good child, everything was Agravain's fault, it has nothing to do with me, obedient student. By the way, your mother is Lily, right? Asher asked tentatively. Who else could it be? Mordred pouted. Do you dislike her? Asher asked curiously. I really like Mother, but I also hate her the most. Mordred said this as if she had thought of something annoying, scratching her head in frustration. As they chatted, they had unknowingly left the Divine Tower and continued walking towards the end of the street. The streets of Uruk were not brightly lit at night. After walking for a while, they unknowingly arrived at an alley. The chill here was much colder than the street they had just come from, and a strange wind could be faintly heard from underground. This place is a bit strange. Asher slowed his pace significantly, scanning the surroundings with suspicion. He hadn't noticed it when he was riding the Celestial horse during the day, but now, with his feet on the ground, Asher truly felt a familiar sensation. It was a very familiar sense of closeness, and this closeness stemmed from the blessing of the goddess of death on him. At this moment, the air behind Asher twisted slightly, and some invisible creature quietly approached Asher. TCH, do even ghosts exist in this era? Wandering around at night. Mordred immediately noticed it. She drew her greatsword and slashed at the ghost silently approaching Asher from behind. Anything that was detrimental to her father, she would mercilessly cut down. Ash, be careful, something's not right here. Jean, who had been following behind, giving the father and daughter some private space, now quickly caught up, taking out her weapon and vigilantly looking around. They had unknowingly walked out of the light, and it was clear at a glance that few people passed through here. What's there to be careful about? I can completely blow this whole area away with one strike. Mordred showed a wanton smile, completely forgetting the good child image she had just been maintaining. However, as soon as she raised her sword and took a step forward, the ground seemed to collapse, and a giant pit appeared. Mordred almost fell into it. Asher was quick-witted and pulled her back to the ground. Damn it, there's even a trap. Mordred said angrily, and then she heard Asher call her. She subconsciously looked up and saw Asher bend his finger and flick her forehead. Calm down, did you forget what I said? You actually dared to hit me, Mordred glared at Asher unhappily, then suddenly froze, lowering her head in frustration. Sorry. She almost forgot, this was her father. Jean, can I ask you to take her back first? Asher looked at Jean and said. Jean was startled, then looked at Asher and asked, don't you need our help? It's fine, I can handle things here by myself. Besides. Asher's voice paused slightly. The real point isn't these wandering ghosts. If he wasn't mistaken, there was a place beneath this giant pit. The underworld. In this era, the underworld was a place humans could reach, after all, you just had to keep digging down. The reason he felt a sense of closeness to this area was probably because of this. It was necessary to go down and take a look, whether to confirm the origin of this familiar feeling or to deal with these wandering ghosts. On the other side, Jean was about to leave with Mordred, but after walking a few steps, Mordred refused to go further. She looked at the black-robed young man in the distance and simply sat down cross-legged on the spot, intending to wait for Asher to come out there, even though Jean tried to persuade her. Seeing this, Jean had no choice but to sit down with her. In fact, she also didn't really want to leave and planned to wait for Asher to come out here. She looked up at the young man not far away. Asher had already mounted the white celestial horse and flew into the giant pit. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 292, Chapter 292, How to Obtain the Goddess's Forgiveness. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. Sleipnir, the Pegasus from Norse mythology, capable of traversing the entire sky and even easily reaching the underworld. However, in this era, the underworld was merely a place reached by digging into the ground, so it actually had little to do with Sleipnir. At present, this Pegasus served merely as an ordinary mount. Asher rode the Pegasus into the underworld. His gaze swept around, taking in the pervasive gloom. Long, cage-like structures filled with a faint blue light were scattered everywhere. These were the prison lances, woven by the goddess of the underworld to serve as dwellings for the deceased. The aura of death here is truly potent, Asher murmured to himself, then turned slightly, his gaze falling upon a narrow cliff path not far away. He could sense an even stronger aura of death emanating from there. Asher dismissed Sleipnir and stepped towards the small, narrow crevice. Before him appeared a door. The 7 gates of the underworld. One had to answer a relevant question at each gate. Although it was said there were no standard answers, any response was acceptable. However, the longer one stayed here, the more their fate power would decrease. Fate power, simply put, was luck. Once it was exhausted, one would become an unlucky person. But for Asher, this was not an issue. The goddess of death's blessing allowed him to resist the debuffs cast by the underworld, and he didn't need to worry about his luck becoming E-rank from staying too long. This place looks quite new. I wonder if Sister Morgan also knows about the so-called underworld. Asher surveyed the door before him, which felt profoundly deep at first glance, and pondered silently. He stepped forward, lightly knocked on the doorframe, and called out loudly, "Hey, anyone there?" "Hey." Boom. A loud bang echoed in the underworld, followed by an extremely unpleasant sound, like rusty gears turning. "Thou dost not belong here, nor art thou a living being, unknown servant. What is thy purpose in coming here?" "Just passing by, felt a bit of familiarity, so I came down to take a look," Asher said. "Can we talk? I'm a bit curious if the death aura of different pantheons is interconnected." The voice in the underworld immediately fell silent. The goddess, who had resided here for tens of thousands of years and was overly lonely, was either moved by Asher's suggestion to chat together or angered by Asher's tone, which sounded like an old neighbor casually dropping by. "Where's everyone?" Asher muttered. "Doesn't work, huh?" Cough. "Considering thou hast gone through immense hardships to appear here, I shall grant thee the opportunity to enter my palace, servant who has fallen into the underworld, answer my question. Actually, I was just passing by, Asher added. The voice caught in its throat for a moment, and its tone seemed to carry a hint of anger, becoming harsh and shrill. She quickened her pace and asked, the standards of beauty seem varied, yet there is an absolute existence. Between the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, and the goddess of heaven, Ishtar, who is more beautiful? Asher frowned. Honestly, he really hated these kinds of questions. Asher remembered back in the land of shadows, Morgan often asked him such questions, and even his Shishou asked similar ones. But never mind, the one asking now wasn't his Shishou or Morgan. For these two goddesses, answering either one was the same. Ereshkigal and Ishtar. Asher thought for a moment. Ereshkigal, I suppose. Asher had only met the goddess of heaven so far. Although she wore very little clothing and showed an arrogant yet somewhat silly side, she was indeed a quite beautiful goddess. However, her personality was simply terrible. While she had a somewhat clumsy but cute vibe, since they were in the underworld, he naturally had to answer with the goddess of the underworld. Ding dong dong, correct answer. This question was practically given away. Asher grumbled inwardly, stepped through the first gate, and quickly arrived before the second. If all earthly wealth were to be guarded by one person, should that person be the goddess of heaven, or the goddess of the underworld? And it's all these obvious questions. Asher decisively answered, goddess of the underworld, and smoothly passed through the second gate. The question for the third gate quickly came, if a living person were to mistakenly enter this place at this moment, and only one of you two could leave, whom do you think is more suitable to leave? Me. Asher pointed to himself. What an unhesitating answer. You are merely a servant, even if you dissipate, nothing would happen, right? While it's true nothing would happen if I dissipate, I have other things to do here, Asher said. Besides, I don't know that person. He shrugged. After all, when asked moral questions, most people can unhesitatingly say what aligns with moral standards, but when they actually experience it themselves, they might give themselves special treatment. It's like standing on dry land and criticizing someone struggling in water, expecting others to do what you yourself cannot. So, I just answered your question honestly. The voice on the other end quickly fell silent, and even the aura of death that had spread earlier paused for a moment. Then, the entire underworld seemed to tremble, and even Asher almost lost his footing. Very well, you are an honest fellow. But merely this, the questions are not yet over. Continue forward, let me see how you answer the other questions. Although her tone was incredibly cold, it was not difficult to imagine that the girl speaking now was undoubtedly seated on her throne, looking impatient, eagerly hoping that Asher would continue towards the fourth gate so she could continue questioning him. After all, besides the king, no living being had entered the underworld for a very long time, let alone talk to her. She meant taking her test. Quickly, move forward, unknown servant, your test is not yet over. The voice began to urge, but Asher remained standing, chin in hand, lost in thought. Quickly, move forward, unknown servant. Move forward, servant. Asher still didn't move, deep in thought, and the urging voice grew weaker and weaker, sounding as if it was wronged and wanted to squat in a corner drawing circles. At that moment, Asher finally moved. He took a step forward. But only one step, then stopped. Servant, why do you stop? Asher ignored the voice, called out Sleipnir, and then mounted it. The voice finally panicked, hastily asking, where are you going? It feels too troublesome. I only came in to take a look because I sensed a familiar aura of death, but continuously answering questions is too much trouble. I'm going back. The remaining questions are all very simple. All simple. Yes, they're all multiple choice questions, very easy to answer. Perhaps it was because she hadn't chatted with anyone for too long, the voice suddenly softened considerably. That's pretty good, Asher nodded gently. Then. But never mind, I refuse to answer. I didn't really have anything to ask you anyway, and someone's waiting for me outside. The voice stopped abruptly. Asher patted Sleipnir's head. The Pegasus flapped its wings and flew towards the ground. From behind, an annoyed voice came, you'll regret this, you'll definitely regret this. This was the first time the goddess of the underworld had been so angered. She felt she had been played. He clearly sounded like he intended to answer the questions, but then he suddenly ran off. He just brazenly rode that horse away, and she had no way to stop him. The horse was completely immune to the restrictions of the underworld, as long as he didn't enter the deep palace of the underworld, she had no way to restrict him. You will definitely regret this. I will not forgive you. Even if you prostrate yourself at the feet of the goddess of the underworld, kneeling for 3 days and 3 nights, you will never gain her forgiveness. By the end, her voice was much softer, muttering, I hate bad children the most. Asher didn't care much, riding Sleipnir out of the underworld. So slow. Should have just gone in with Father King. Mordred annoyed scratched her head, impatiently drawing her greatsword. I should just go down and see. As she spoke, she took a step forward, but Jean was quick-witted and pulled Mordred back. Calm down. If your father king comes back now, wouldn't you two just miss each other? You're right. Mordred plopped down, arms crossed, looking very frustrated. Jean couldn't help but show a faint smile. This was truly completely different from Ash, he wouldn't be so impatient. What are you looking at? Mordred noticed Jean's gaze and turned to her. Oh, right, what are you to my father king? Why do you seem so close to him? Jean's smile from earlier stiffened slightly. What to him? Just that, Mordred scratched her hair and sighed, never mind, just pretend I didn't ask. Jean looked at Mordred with some surprise. She hadn't expected this girl to have such a keen sense of smell. She and Asher hadn't shown any intimate behavior, yet Mordred could still sense something. This girl seemed a bit rough and tumble, but perhaps not as oblivious as she seemed. The atmosphere fell silent again. Jean glanced at Mordred, who was now closing her eyes, seemingly trying to suppress the restlessness in her heart. Jean couldn't help but show a kind smile, listening to your conversation with Ash. Father King, just now, you seem to like your father King very much. Mordred opened her eyes and nodded as if it were obvious, of course. He is the King of Britain. All the knights of the Round Table used to follow his arrangements. Even Morgan and Scáthach listened to him. While others would be timid around those two women, Father King was different. Sounds very impressive, Jean said with a faint smile. Thinking to herself, why can't I see Ash having such a strong side, and even making Morgan and Scáthach listen to him? Aren't those two his sister and his Shishou? It seemed like others deliberately created an omnipotent Father King atmosphere for Mordred, and they all cooperated with Asher in front of Mordred. Right. Super impressive. You really get it. Mordred grinned, suddenly seeming much closer to Jean. What about your Queen Mother? Jean asked. Mordred's smile from earlier quickly faded, and she said sullenly, the person I hate most is Queen Mother. Is her personality bad? Jean asked. I didn't say that about her. If you say bad things about her again, don't blame me if I lay hands on you, Mordred glared at Jean with a fierce look. Jean. This is truly a very awkward personality. She only inferred Artoria's personality wasn't good based on Mordred's words. Only allowed herself to speak ill of her mother, she really is protective. Jean smiled, intending to continue asking, when a horse's neigh sounded, and Asher rode Sleipnir back to them. Let's go back, he said. Father King. Mordred immediately rushed over. What's going on in there? Asher shook his head, nothing, there was a god down there who kept asking me questions. I felt it was too much trouble, so I came back. It's getting late, let's go back first. Mordred nodded, and the three returned to their residence together. As it was late, they didn't chat much further but each returned to their respective rooms. The next morning, Asher woke up, but before he could fully recover, he heard hurried footsteps approaching. Then, a veiled priestess quickly came to the door of his room and lifted the curtain. Lord Asher, something bad has happened. What's wrong? Asher looked up and asked in confusion. The king has passed away. Asher froze for a moment, his voice raising a few octaves. What did you say? The king died from overwork early this morning, the priestess said, lowering her head with a mournful expression. Asher immediately went to the main hall and found that, besides Merlin, who had been ordered to find the Tablet of Destinies, and the servants who had gone to defend against the beasts early this morning, the other servants were all gathered there. Mordred was not present either. Clearly, she was not one to sit still, and had run out of the northern wall with Ushawakamaru early this morning. Asher looked up at Gilgamesh, who was leaning on the throne. If he hadn't asked others and confirmed that Gilgamesh had suddenly died early this morning, he would probably have thought the other party was just resting for a moment. The king said that your Pegasus Sleipnir can fly freely to all parts of the world, Lord Asher. May I ask you to go to the underworld and bring the king's soul back to the living world? Siduri bowed slightly to Asher and respectfully asked. Asher nodded gently. Gilgamesh was the main reason he came here this time. He couldn't let Gilgamesh just sleep in the underworld like this. It seemed he had to make another trip to the underworld. As if remembering something, Asher's body suddenly stiffened, and the events of last night, along with the goddess of the underworld's final annoyed voice, came back to him. Clearly, she had indeed been angered by Asher's sudden departure from the underworld on horseback last night. What's wrong, Lord Asher? Siduri noticed Asher's abnormality and asked in confusion. Nothing. Asher shook his head, muttering with a subtle tone, I'm currently considering what kneeling posture would best obtain that goddess's forgiveness. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 293, Chapter 293, The Goddess with Maxed Imagination. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. Asher walked out of the divine tower and looked up at the sky. After a long time, he averted his gaze and sighed faintly. Regardless, for Gilgamesh's sake, he had to go to the underworld again. But, he felt that if he didn't go to the underworld, it would be fine, but going might make the other party remember his sudden escape last night, and she might even change her mind about letting Gilgamesh go. He had to find a way. Asher looked at the azure sky, pondering for a long time. Suddenly, a dark shadow flashed across the sky. Asher's eyes widened after half a second of hesitation. Speaking of which, Ishtar and the goddess of the underworld belong to the same pantheon, and they've had quite a bit of conflict in the past. Perhaps she knows how to approach that goddess. But before that, he had to go see Siduri first. He had just offended Ishtar recently, and if he went to her empty-handed now, she would probably hit him with a beam of light as soon as they met. Returning to the divine tower, he found Siduri. After explaining the situation to her, Siduri very readily lent Asher some gems from her personal stores. About 5 bags worth. As a priestess serving the king, she was indeed quite affluent. After thanking Siduri, Asher took out the stone Ishtar had given him 2 days ago. Then he thought, summoning Ishtar here in the city would probably cause panic among the residents. He had to go to the wilderness. So he summoned Sleipnir, flew to the outskirts, and infused magic into the stone. Not long after, accompanied by a rushing sound, Ishtar appeared before Asher, riding her skyboat in a near drift, as if showing off her piloting skills, or perhaps proving to Asher that her collision with him that day was purely an accident, and that her piloting skills were still excellent. "You scoundrel, how dare you call me out?" And Ishtar was still in her scantily clad attire, her gaze sweeping around. "And in such a desolate wilderness, aren't you afraid I'll attack you? I believe a noble goddess would not strike an unarmed person." However, upon hearing this, Ishtar's face showed disbelief, and she glared at Asher with fury. "Ha! You yourself are a deity, aren't you? Are you mocking me?" After saying that, she drew her bow, her originally red eyes instantly turning into brilliant gold. Asher sighed helplessly at the sight. This goddess, she needs to let people finish speaking. Asher spread his hands, indicating he had no weapons. "Do you think I'd call you out for no reason just to provoke you? Do you think I'm that boring?" Who knows? Ishtar looked Asher up and down. After pondering for a moment, as if she had realized something, she jumped off her skyboat with a heave-ho, and quickly walked to Asher, tightly gripping his hands. What are you doing?" Startled by Ishtar's sudden outburst of intensity, Asher instinctively took 2 steps back. "Did you find that thing?" Ishtar asked, her eyes gleaming. "That thing? That, the bowl of heaven," Ishtar said, then looked confusedly behind Asher, and then muttered to herself in confusion, "But such a large thing, why can't I see it now? Could it be that it was thrown somewhere, and that's why you came to me for help?" Asher's mouth was slightly agape, and before he could speak, he saw Ishtar release his hands, then cross her arms and nod. "On second thought, I was too impulsive just now. After all, we have a cooperative relationship. You calling me out with that stone must be about the bowl of heaven." At this, her cheeks flushed slightly, and she secretly glanced at the black-haired young man before her, then whispered, "It was my fault earlier, but you should have made it clear from the beginning that it was about the bowl of heaven. After all, we just had a fight, so it's normal for me to misunderstand." Asher was briefly lost in thought about his life. With Ishtar saying all this, he momentarily didn't know how to respond to her. Should I just trick her into going to the underworld? Anyway, as long as I tell her the bowl of heaven is in the underworld, she'd probably risk her old life to go with me. But that would inevitably bring endless trouble later, so he had to pass on that idea. "You calm down first, and listen to me." In short, he'd try to get this goddess to calm down first. Ishtar nodded, then took a short deep breath and gradually calmed down. Realizing her earlier lapse in composure, she lightly coughed, crossed her arms, turned her head, and snorted, "Don't misunderstand, I've always been calm. I was just trying to mislead you, right? I was using that method to mislead you and make you complacent. Do you understand?" Asher silently nodded. He'd just take her word for it. Ishtar said with satisfaction, "All right, then tell me quickly." Looking at her eager, expectant eyes and enchanting smile, Asher suddenly felt a little embarrassed to state the purpose of his visit. "I came to you not because of the bowl of heaven." However, thoughts are thoughts, he still had to speak. Gilgamesh couldn't be delayed for too long, otherwise, all of Uruk would fall into chaos. Ishtar's lovely smile slowly solidified, then, after a brief bewilderment, she gradually regained her senses. Her earlier anticipation shattered in an instant, and she stared at Asher, saying, "Continue." Actually, it's like this. Asher generally explained the whole story and his purpose, then looked at Ishtar and asked, "Do you have any ideas? Or, do you know if the goddess of the underworld has anything she likes?" The goddess of the underworld. As if remembering some unbearable past, Ishtar's expression changed. The next second, she turned and jumped onto her skyboat. "I thought you were coming to me for something else, but you're here to ask me about that idiot." She made a face at Asher. "And you want me to help you, and save that flashy golden guy too? Don't even think about it. Go bother yourself, you fool." Ishtar was the goddess of heaven, and in contrast, Ereshkigal, or Eresh for short, was the goddess of the underworld. The reason Ishtar was summoned in such scantily clad attire was entirely because Ereshkigal had stripped her clothes in the underworld during her lifetime. No wonder she was so angry now. After all, Asher was asking her face to face how to curry favor with another goddess. If she didn't know that she might not be able to beat Asher, Ishtar would probably have already attacked him by now. "Can't you help?" Asher asked. "Of course not. What do you take me for? I'm a goddess, the goddess of heaven. You actually ask me how to curry favor with other goddesses, and it's that gloomy one in the underworld. What were you thinking, you fool?" Ishtar said angrily, "I would rather die than tell you that goddess's preferences." After saying that, she was about to leave on her skyboat, but as soon as she flew into the air, a stone suddenly whistled past Ishtar from behind, accompanied by a brilliant flash of light, and then plummeted directly into the forest. Ishtar was stunned for a moment, then sharply turned her head. On the ground, the young man in the black robe was playfully holding a small bag. Then he took out a sparkling gem, weighed it in his hand, and casually tossed it into the forest. Next, without even looking at Ishtar, he took out a third gem. Ishtar's skyboat seemed to be attracted by the gems and slowly descended beside Asher. What are you doing?" Ishtar asked somewhat awkwardly. This was understandable. After all, she had just lost her temper at Asher and vowed she would die before helping him, only to then land right beside him. Asher sighed, looking regretfully at the bag of gems in his hand, and said helplessly, "I originally wanted to trade these with you, but you don't intend to cooperate, so these things are useless to me now." "Trade?" Ishtar's gaze was attracted by the gems in Asher's hand for a moment, then she feigned indifference, leaning against her skyboat and crossing her legs. "Tell me, how do you want to trade? For old time's sake, I'll listen carefully to what you have to say." Ishtar's tone was indifferent, showing an air of casualness provided one didn't look at her eyes, which were now uncontrollably drawn to the gems like magnets. "I want to know if that goddess of the underworld has anything she likes, as a gift of apology," Asher asked. "Sending gifts?" Ishtar looked at Asher in confusion. "Did you do something bad to her?" Asher awkwardly scratched his forehead. "It wasn't really anything bad, but I probably made her angry." "Made her angry?" Ishtar looked at Asher with doubt, then asked with great interest, "Tell me the details." Asher generally explained what happened last night, and upon hearing the end, Ishtar burst into laughter, pounding on her skyboat as if she had hit a funny bone, seemingly genuinely amused. "Ha ha ha ha, I didn't realize you were quite good at annoying people. Good." After a while, Ishtar finally managed to calm herself down, rubbed the tears from the corners of her eyes, and looked up. "I understand. I'll help you, considering how much you've amused me." "Ah. But business is business, the transaction amount still can't be less." "I know that," Asher nodded. "Then, how much do you plan to trade with?" Ishtar asked. Asher extended an index finger. "Ah. You want to hire me with just one bag? What kind of person do you take me for?" Ishtar scornfully turned her head away and said faintly, "I am the goddess of beauty who presides over Venus, a symbol of fertility, war, and destruction. You think you can dismiss me with just this little bit?" Although she said this, her attention was completely focused on Asher. Then, under her gaze, Asher extended a second finger. The eyes of the goddess of heaven gleamed slightly, but she still said nothing. Quickly extend a third finger." Her gaze was fixed on Asher, hoping he would quickly extend a third finger. 5 bags of gems. Asher directly extended 5 fingers. "Consider it." Ishtar still said nothing, looking disdainful, only snorting softly, "I am the goddess of heaven. You actually dare to try to bribe me with 5 bags of gems." Seeing this, Asher couldn't help but sigh and withdrew the small bag of gems from his hand. What are you doing?" Ishtar's eyes widened, and she hastily asked. "Since the great goddess of heaven is unwilling to accept this transaction, then I shall have to give up," Asher said with great helplessness. "Although I regret it, there's nothing I can do. I'll try to think of another way. If worst comes to worst, I'll just go down to the underworld myself. That would save a huge amount of money too. Then, farewell, Goddess Ishtar." Wait a minute." Seeing Asher genuinely intending to turn and leave, Ishtar quickly called out to him. Asher stopped, turned, and looked at Ishtar in confusion. Is there anything else, Goddess Ishtar? Ishtar let out a tiny whimper, covered her flushed cheeks, turned her head away, and after hesitating for a long time, she finally frustratedly hugged her head. Arg, I get it. I agree, all right. Is that good enough? It sounded filled with humiliation, like someone accosting a beautiful girl on the street, asking for a price, and after much deliberation, finally agreeing to sell herself. Thank you for your assistance, Asher said respectfully. Stop using that attitude to deliberately make me drop my guard, Ishtar gave Asher a disdainful look. Also, you can just call me Ishtar. It's too strange for one god to give another god an honorific. I'm not a god, Asher shook his head. I don't know what happened to you, but at least you've descended as a god now, haven't you? Ishtar said this, then saw Asher extend his hand. Is he going to shake hands? Ishtar still had her arms crossed, giving a light snort, then, under Asher's gaze, she finally extended her hand and shook his. What a manipulative fellow, Ishtar muttered. Clearly, Asher already knew she would agree. His feigned regret earlier was simply to make her anxious. You should let go now, and you should tell me about that. Goddess of the underworld, shouldn't you? At this, Asher's voice sounded, pulling Ishtar back to reality. She said, sorry, then let go of his hand, and then looked up at him. Regarding that goddess, I actually don't know much, but of course. At least I know more than you do. Fearing that Asher would go back on his word and take the gems from her, Ishtar hastily added, indicating that she still knew some information. Then hurry up and tell me, Asher sighed softly. Under Ishtar's gaze, he plopped down on the grass behind him and looked up at the surrounding scenery. He felt that this goddess was not only a bit silly but also very good at building suspense. If he didn't sit down and rest for a while, he felt his patience was about to run out. You're really impatient, are you that eager to see that goddess? Ishtar complained, then looked down at Asher sitting on the grass. She first froze, then a playful smile appeared on her face. Oh, I see you're embarrassed, aren't you? Asher froze, what? So that's how it is, Ishtar's face showed a playful expression. She raised her hand and stroked Asher's face. You're shy, aren't you? You keep urging me to explain quickly just because you're not good at dealing with assertive women, so you hope I don't keep staring at you, right? Asher was stunned again. I just sat down to rest, why did that become being shy? He. Looking at the bewildered Asher, Ishtar's smile grew even wider. You dared to trick a goddess earlier, I can't let that grudge go unpaid. Can you please explain about that goddess first? Asher said helplessly. All right, don't rush me. I've rarely given you such an opportunity for intimate contact with a goddess. Don't you understand at all how to seize the opportunity to curry favor with a goddess? But then again, you haven't known where to look since just now, have you? You seem eager for me to explain, but in reality, it's because you're shy and embarrassed to look at me, right? Asher. Fine, whatever makes you happy. Ishtar's smile grew even wider. Seeing Asher at a loss, she was suddenly in a good mood and nodded, Given my current good mood, I'll do my best to help you conquer that goddess. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 294, aha, I got you now, in the underworld. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available fire. This is what you meant by giving it your all. Asher looked at the goddess beside him. Not long ago, she stood with her hands on her hips, boasting, leave everything to me. Now, there was no trace of that confidence on her face. Shut up. This is called caution. When you enter an enemy's territory, shouldn't you be careful and vigilant? Ishtar cautiously surveyed her surroundings, then glared at Asher and continued, besides, I wasn't even supposed to follow you into the underworld. Just telling you about that underworld goddess would have been enough. Now that I'm here with you, shouldn't you be properly grateful for this favor? Thank you for your favor, lady goddess. Ugh. Ishtar let out a faint whine. I knew I shouldn't have followed you in, you ungrateful wretch. But I'm thanking you. What else do you want? Ishtar pointed a finger at Asher. You're clearly trying to subtly insult me. Asher looked at Ishtar, speechless. This goddess was so willful, a huge difference compared to Sister Morgan. Are you comparing me to other goddesses right now? Ishtar seemed to have thought of something, looking up. And saying, Are you comparing me to this underworld goddess of death? In a way, the Venus goddess's intuition was spot on, and quite terrifying. As they chatted, the two arrived at the 7 gates of the underworld. We're here, Asher said, simultaneously looking down at the carnation in his hand. That was the flower's name. It was said that the goddess liked such flowers. It was a pity Merlin wasn't here, otherwise, he might have been able to conjure up more carnations. Strange. Don't you have to answer a question every time you pass through a gate? Asher looked at the first gate in confusion, muttering to himself, why is there no sound now? It is a bit strange. Ishtar also looked at the first gate ahead in confusion. Did that guy lift these questions? Or is she neglecting her duties and currently sleeping soundly on a huge rock or something? Asher tried to analyze. Cough. The gate finally spoke. Question. Finally. Asher walked to the gate. Come on, no matter what the question is this time, I'll answer you. Some people get angry easily, while others are very tolerant. Now, Asher, please answer. How do you think one can forgive someone who refused to turn back last night no matter how much they were called, and instead rode their horse straight out of here? Should they kneel by the underworld goddess's side for 3 days and 3 nights, devoutly apologizing, or continue riding their horse to escape the underworld? Asher. Clearly, the goddess had changed the question on the fly. To actually name you specifically to answer. Did you really do something very offensive? Ishtar asked, a hint of worry in her voice. I genuinely didn't do anything. Maybe she's just too resentful. Don't worry too much, if worse comes to worst, we'll just force our way in, Asher said with a smile, turning his head. Ishtar turned her face away, a blush appearing on her cheeks, and muttered, I'm not worried, don't misunderstand. It's just that I accepted your request, so I need to see it through. Also, haven't you realized by now that even gods must abide by the rules here? Ishtar continued to ask. I have. In fact, it's precisely because I sense the original essence that I came down to investigate last night, Asher said. Original essence. Ishtar repeated, then looked up at Asher again, her gaze fixed for a moment before she withdrew it. So that's how it is. Was the place you were responsible for as a god in your past life also similar to the underworld? Asher shook his head. It was too troublesome to explain, and he couldn't be bothered. Anyway, we've just been chatting this whole time, it's a bit sad that we've ignored her, Asher said, looking up at the gate. Ever since he and Ishtar started talking, the gate had been repeatedly saying the same phrase, but no one had paid attention. Answer, please answer. Please answer. It just kept repeating the same sentence. Who cares about her? In fact, seeing that gloomy guy frustrated makes me feel great, Ishtar snorted. Asher sighed. Ishtar might not care, but he couldn't afford to, so he had no choice but to say, I choose one. Ding dong dong. Perfect correct answer. Please proceed, hurry and proceed. Your path ahead will be smooth and unobstructed. When the voice of the underworld goddess sounded, Asher stepped towards the second gate, only to his surprise, found it was open. And after that, the third to the 7th gates were all wide open. In short, he didn't need to answer any more questions. But it didn't make him happy. Undoubtedly, the other party was simply eager for him to enter the palace beyond the gates, which was why she granted him this privilege. Are you still coming with me? Asher turned to ask Ishtar, who had shrunk in size behind him. This was a curse Ishtar had carried from her past life. With each gate she passed, a 7th of her divinity would be stripped away, and her body would shrink. Once she stepped through the last gate, this Ishtar would probably be the size of a figurine. A living, talking figurine, sounds kind of interesting. Ishtar was still hesitating whether to continue forward, but as soon as she heard Asher's words, she immediately straightened her back. Of course, the mere underworld is nothing to fear for me. Even if Ishtar was currently burdened by the underworld, having to lose a portion of her divinity with each gate, she would still not be afraid. Asher saw this and didn't try to persuade her further. Instead, he continued to walk through the remaining gates, and Ishtar's body kept getting smaller. Ash, are we partners? Ishtar suddenly asked softly. No, it wasn't soft, it was just that her body had shrunk, causing her voice to become smaller as well. Asher turned to look at the heavenly goddess, now only the size of his palm. He felt an inexplicable urge to laugh, but then remembered that she was willing to follow him deep into the underworld for this so-called request, and couldn't help but feel a touch of emotion. She could have just run off with those jewels after telling him about the underworld goddess, but she still came with him to the underworld. Regardless of the reason, her sentiment was quite touching. Asher extended his hand to Ishtar. Come on up. It'll be faster if I carry you. Ishtar's face unknowingly flushed. She lightly bit her lip, squirmed a bit, but finally stepped onto Asher's palm. Carrying the now palm-sized Ishtar, Asher successfully passed through the 7 gates of the underworld and arrived inside the palace. Boom. With a sound that seemed to be a display of power, a giant skeleton monster appeared before Asher. The surrounding palace's chill spread, and the temperature was no longer an environment where humans could stay for long. Runic script glowed at this moment. Ishtar felt the warmth emanating from Asher's palm but said in dissatisfaction, "Don't underestimate me. I am a goddess, after all, and I won't freeze to death from this temperature." "Oh, is that so? You should have said something earlier." "Wasting my magic," Asher nodded, withdrawing the warmth that had spread to his palm. Ishtar. For the first time, Ishtar secretly wished for the underworld goddess to succeed. She desperately hoped that this unknown god would be humiliated by the underworld goddess. The giant skeleton monster slowly spoke, "Servant, do you remember what happened last night?" "I apologize for what happened last night, so I'm here today to apologize to you." "I was wrong, and I won't dare to do it again," Asher said, offering the carnation in his hand to the giant skeleton monster. "What is this? Do you intend to bribe me with such a paltry thing?" Asher could feel a gaze from behind the giant skeleton intently watching the flower in his hand. "This is a carnation. I think it suits the underworld goddess very well, so I wanted to offer it to you. One day, it will bloom throughout the entire underworld," Asher said. "Suits me well, does it?" For some reason, the voice remained incredibly cold, but one could sense that someone's lips were unconsciously curving upwards. "I accept your sincerity. Place the flower down." Asher placed the carnation into the ground beside them, finally feeling a sense of relief. "That should be fine now, right?" Just as he thought that, he heard the voice return, "And, do you remember the choice you made at the first gate?" Asher. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 295, Chapter 295, Ereshkigal's Little Trick. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. Upon hearing the underworld goddess's words, Asher could only sigh. Then, under a gaze from the darkness, he stepped deeper into the palace. There was no choice. To rescue Gilgamesh, he had to endure this humiliation and enter the palace. "Wait, just you wait." Ishtar was clearly displeased but couldn't stop Asher. At this point, she was only the size of a figurine, and her tiny hand vigorously slapped Asher's face, though it felt more like a tickle. "Oh my. I was wondering why there's been a buzzing sound like an insect. Isn't this goddess Ishtar? How did you end up in such a pathetic state?" Ereshkigal said with a provocative tone, trying to ignite Ishtar's anger. "A pathetic little insect like this, I could just gently pinch her to death with my finger." "Enough nonsense. I wasn't talking to you." Ishtar gave the underworld goddess no pleasantries, instead vigorously patting Asher's face. "Wake up. Don't you know the consequences of staying in the underworld for too long?" "I know," Asher said. Although the underworld was a place living people could potentially reach, the environment here was simply too harsh. The temperature alone made it unsuitable for humans to stay for extended periods, and the constantly diminishing fate energy was another crucial factor. If a living person stayed here too long, even if they returned to the surface, they would immediately die due to their weak fate energy, from accidents including but not limited to car crashes, choking on water, or choking on food. "But the rules of the underworld don't seem to affect me much, so don't worry too much," Asher said. Whether it was his servant status, Odin's magic, or the blessing of the goddess of death Morgan had once given him, Asher felt no discomfort upon entering the underworld. "No, that's not what I meant." Ishtar said angrily, "You're a god, aren't you? Wouldn't you feel embarrassed to humbly kneel before another god? And look, that's kneeling. Wouldn't your legs get numb after a while?" Cough. It doesn't have to be kneeling, sitting normally is fine. Ultimately, staying in the underworld is a punishment for him. The underworld goddess's untimely cough came from the side. "Did you hear that?" Asher turned to look at Ishtar, whose expression had become stunned. "Ah. You're so annoying, you idiot. Go die, idiot." Soon, Ishtar covered her face with both hands, looking utterly despairing. The underworld goddess let out a triumphant laugh. "Don't worry, although it's a punishment, as a god, I will face you in my true form. Be grateful for my benevolence," and then a steaming mist seemed to rise from the giant skeleton monster's body, and then its massive form gradually dissipated. "Be astonished by my beauty, unknown servant." As the goddess's last words fell, her true form appeared before Asher. "How is it? Are you surprised? Was your vision greatly impacted?" Ereshkigal stood with her hands on her hips, proudly raising her chin, an expression of triumph on her face. From her appearance, she and Ishtar looked quite similar. The biggest difference, perhaps, was her dazzling golden hair. Yes, everything else was quite similar, including their chests. Asher, who had already anticipated this, didn't react much. At most, he was slightly surprised. Ereshkigal saw that Asher didn't show the reaction she expected, and recalling her grand entrance line, a wave of intense embarrassment washed over her. She said nervously, "Why aren't you reacting at all? Hey, say something." "Ah, yes. I am very surprised," Asher said, his tone like someone reciting lines. "You're just humoring me, aren't you?" Ereshkigal cried out in despair, tears seemingly welling in her eyes. Asher quickly added, "I'm serious. I really was quite surprised earlier. I didn't expect the underworld goddess to be such a beautiful girl. Whether Gilgamesh could leave depended on this goddess's mood. If he angered her, it would be troublesome." However, Ishtar's voice inconveniently chimed in, "You don't need to specifically comfort this guy. After seeing me, it's perfectly normal to feel nothing when you see her appearance. You have no right to speak here." Ereshkigal glared at the figurine-sized Ishtar standing on Asher's shoulder, her eyes full of fury. "Oh my, did I hit a sore spot and now you're flustered?" Ishtar covered her mouth, a look of disdain on her face. Ereshkigal took a shallow breath, then slowly exhaled. After finally calming herself, a faint smile returned to her face. "No matter what, it's better than a certain exhibitionist, right?" "What?" Almost instantly, a string in Ishtar's mind, pricked at a sore spot, snapped. She sharply raised her head and glared at Ereshkigal, who was now looking at her triumphantly. All right, both of you calm down." Asher felt a massive headache. He truly regretted letting Ishtar come along. If he had known these two would argue the moment they met, he wouldn't have brought her in for anything. "Goddess of the underworld, can you please release Gilgamesh's soul?" Asher asked. Ereshkigal was startled. "Did you come here for this? Otherwise." "That's true. Come to think of it, normal people wouldn't just come to the underworld twice for no reason." Ereshkigal chuckled, her hand against her mouth, then raised her eyes and said, "Be very grateful to me. Normally, it's impossible for the dead to return to the surface, but I don't have the time to weave him a cage, so I'll let him go." Did she mean to say dwelling just now? Asher thought to himself. Clearly, because the term dwelling didn't fit the underworld goddess's cold and heartless image, Ereshkigal quickly changed it to cage. "Be very grateful to me, unknown servant." Ereshkigal paused here and curiously examined Asher. "By the way, what's your name? It feels strange calling you unknown servant all the time." "Asher, or you can call me Ash." "Is that so?" Ereshkigal again looked Asher over, seemingly trying to get a clear look at his face, but his white had mostly obscured his features. Honestly, she was quite interested in this good child who had honestly answered several of her questions last night. Noticing Ereshkigal's gaze, Ishtar unconsciously frowned, feeling inexplicably annoyed. Although Asher had nothing to do with her, this kind of gaze still made her feel very uncomfortable. "Hey, idiot, don't be fooled. She's the underworld goddess, the god who represents human death," Ishtar reminded him from the side. "I know she's the underworld goddess," Asher said, "but does her identity really matter?" Ishtar was stunned for a moment, and Asher continued. "I also know a goddess of death myself, but she has a very good personality. After all, even for a god, presiding over death isn't something she chose, is it? Ultimately, it was simply because the underworld needed a god, not because Ereshkigal herself decided to become the underworld goddess." Ereshkigal looked up, her eyes suddenly sparkling. "So, even the goddess of the underworld could be liked and recognized by people?" No. Ereshkigal shook her head violently. "I am the underworld goddess, I am an existence meant to destroy humanity." "Ah, but wouldn't that completely contradict what Asher just said? Presiding over death doesn't mean one is evil. He thinks I'm a good child. If he knew I wanted to destroy humanity, wouldn't I become a bad child?" Ereshkigal held her head, shaking it vigorously, looking incredibly conflicted. "Are you here to greet this king, Asher?" Just then, Gilgamesh's voice suddenly rang out, drawing all three of their gazes. Outside the palace, a golden-haired man was striding towards them. "Gilgamesh, you knew I'd come?" Asher asked, looking at the approaching men in confusion. "Of course, everything in this world is within this king's prediction. Even your own sudden death." Asher placed his hand on his chin. "No, that's not right. You shouldn't waste magic for such a trivial matter. You've summoned so many servants, you shouldn't have much magic left." Ha, Asher." Gilgamesh looked at the bewildered young man. "Some things are best known in your heart. Speaking them aloud is disrespectful to the king." Gilgamesh's meaning was clear, just know it in your heart, don't always undermine me. Ishtar looked left and right, then couldn't help but let out a snicker. It was quite a rare sight to see that king getting flustered. Gilgamesh paid no mind to Ishtar's unrestrained laughter and looked at Asher, saying, "Let's go. It's time we left this gloomy place. Back to working overtime." Asher complained inwardly, then shook his head. Sorry. I'm afraid I'll have to stay here for a few more days. Gilgamesh raised an eyebrow. Why? Have you been swayed by the underworld goddess's superficial beauty? If so, this king will truly be disappointed in you, Asher. Where did your mind go? I'm staying to save you. Asher retorted irritably. Oh. Tell this king about it, Gilgamesh asked with interest. So, Asher briefly recounted the events he had encountered. Upon hearing the end, Gilgamesh agreed to Asher's plan and then prepared to leave on his own. Why don't you leave with Gilgamesh first? Asher turned to the miniature Ishtar standing on his shoulder. Huh? You want me to leave with that guy? Ishtar asked in disbelief. What I mean is, you leave the underworld with Gilgamesh first, and then you can go wherever you want. Asher paused slightly. Or, if you don't mind, you can go back to the temple dedicated to you in Uruk and rest there. Do you think that's possible? Ishtar glanced disdainfully at Gilgamesh. Unless this golden flashy guy apologizes to me and begs me to come back, then I might consider it. Ha 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 ha, what a huge joke. Uruk is enough with this king, why should I beg an impoverished goddess to return? Uruk doesn't need this incompetent goddess who is of no use whatsoever, and her temple has no place for her to reside. Huh? I'm a god of Uruk. Do I need your permission to return to my own temple? Do these two just argue whenever they meet? Asher pressed his hand to his forehead, letting out a heavy sigh. Just then, his eyes suddenly lit up, and he poked Ishtar's face with his finger. What do you want? Ishtar was in a rage and gave Asher no pleasantries. Why don't you just come back then? Asher asked. Didn't I say? As long as that king properly apologizes to me and begs me, I'll seriously consider it. Ishtar simply sat on Asher's shoulder, turning her head away in a huff. You know that's impossible, Asher said helplessly. Then there's no possibility of negotiation. But I can prepare over 10 bags of jewels as offerings. For you. Asher continued. Since Gilgamesh had implicitly approved of this, Asher naturally didn't have to worry about a shortage of jewels. After all, that king's treasury likely contained countless treasures. Ishtar looked incredibly conflicted, but in the end, she still shook her head firmly. 2 conditions, offerings, and you leave here with me right now. Did this goddess take the wrong medicine? Asher was somewhat speechless. Whether he left or not didn't seem to have anything to do with Ishtar, did it? Was she just trying to compete with Ereshkigal? You go back with her, Ereshkigal, who had been silent until now, suddenly said with a smile. Asher was startled. What about our previous agreement then? It's fine. You have more important things to do, right? Go back first. She's letting me go so easily. Asher still couldn't quite believe it and looked at Ereshkigal again, only to find that she seemed serious. So he tried asking again, then we'll be going. Yes, go, Ereshkigal smiled. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 296, Chapter 296, Foe, Kick Him. Fire. You can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. Ishtar's mood suddenly became somewhat subtle, she couldn't help but glance at Eresh. Why did she feel like she was the one being unreasonable? But things had come to this, and Ishtar couldn't back out now. There was no way she could now say to Asher, why don't you stay? So you don't think I'm stingy? If she said that to Asher, he'd probably think she was a very difficult goddess to deal with, right? Ishtar seemed completely oblivious, but in Asher's eyes, she was indeed very hard to please. Ereshkigal watched the two leaving the underworld. Only after they had left did she reveal the cunning smile unique to a young girl and quietly said, see you tonight. The sun set in the west. After leaving the underworld, Ishtar quickly followed Asher to the street. Seeing the residents who, upon seeing Ishtar, immediately hid away, Asher couldn't help but chuckle. Ishtar's cheeks flushed, and she said indignantly, they just don't know how to react when they see a goddess. You'll see. After saying that, she walked up to a passerby, who immediately greeted Ishtar with a long face. See. Ishtar said triumphantly, glancing at Asher. I see, Asher thought, I saw that passerby looking like they were about to cry from fear. He was really curious what crazy things Ishtar had done. To avoid causing a bigger commotion on the street, Asher pulled Ishtar away from the bustling street without a word, heading towards their previous gathering spot. Ishtar was still muttering something about, dare to touch a goddess, I'll curse you to be barren, and so on. Asher didn't care. His child was probably still lively and killing monstrous beasts. Speaking of which, my temple doesn't seem to have any attendants, does it? Ishtar suddenly said. How about you come be my attendant? Since you've donated treasures to me twice, I can give you this special privilege. Asher completely ignored her, leading Ishtar to a small house. He pulled open the door curtain and found Merlin already back, leisurely resting in a chair. Beside him were Gilgamesh and others, and in the corner, a large, purple-haired L***ly in a black robe stood quietly. Merlin, what happened to your face? Asher looked at the claw marks on Merlin's face in confusion, stepping forward to examine them closely for a moment. Looks a bit like a paw print. Let's not talk about that, Merlin said with an unlucky, I'm so unlucky, expression, waving his hand. His gaze fell upon the woman beside Asher. The one beside you is Goddess Ishtar, right? Why are you here? Ishtar snorted, crossing her arms, and turned her face away, looking as if to say, I'm very aloof right now, don't talk to me. Asher smiled and gave a rough explanation. In short, Ishtar had joined their faction. Subsequently, feeling the admiring glances from the group, Asher merely shook his head, showing no great emotion, though the corners of his mouth almost couldn't help but curl up. So this is what it feels like to be looked at with worship. Ah, I seem to have seen him before too. Mash whispered from the side. Ah, I haven't introduced him to everyone yet. Merlin suddenly looked as if he had just realized something, clapped his hands, and stood up. This is the current king of Britain, or you can call him King Arthur. King Arthur is that young? Mash said, her eyes slightly widened. Foe, sitting on her shoulder, stared at Merlin. Not long ago, when it encountered Merlin, it immediately delivered a heavy blow to Merlin, but it seemed it wasn't quite satisfied, and now looked eager to strike again. Ah, right. Although he's King Arthur, he's always grown up under the shadow of his Shishou and elder sisters. He's quite laid back, in other words, quite casual, so you don't need to be too restrained. Merlin added with a smile. Growing up in the shadow? Gilgamesh repeated, tilting her head slightly, her red hair falling, her bright eyes filled with confusion. Yes, Merlin nodded, continuing, simply put, every day he was, but before Merlin could speak, Asher smiled. He raised his finger, and before Merlin could react, restrained him. Then he called out to Foe on Mash's shoulder, now's your chance. Foe. The fourth beast delivered a seemingly powerless but actually very destructive paw strike to Merlin's face. Then the court mage spun exaggeratedly several times before falling to the ground. Too much, truly too much. Merlin angrily grabbed Foe, who was still trying to pound his face. I let you vent your resentment from back then, but now you dare to hit me again, you ferocious beast. Foe waved its tiny paws, looking super fierce. Serves you right, Asher gave Merlin a gloating look. Although Mash and Gilgamesh looked like they wanted to stop it, they also didn't take Foe away. Indeed, serves him right. From the corner, a voice of agreement suddenly came. Asher looked up and saw a large, purple-haired L***ly standing quietly in the corner, looking at the two paw prints on Merlin's face. She then looked at Asher with a satisfied gaze, the corners of her mouth twitching slightly, but she quickly pressed her lips together, maintaining her expressionless look. Had enough chatting? If you have, take me back to the temple. I'm tired. Ishtar interrupted Asher and the others' conversation, looking very tsundere. Don't you have a skyboat? You can go back by yourself, can't you? Asher retorted. You're my attendant, aren't you? Why so many complaints? When did I become your attendant? From the moment I decided to return to Uruk, Ishtar said with a smile. And this is an opportunity to be by a goddess's side, you know. How can I help you if I'm in a bad mood? What a troublesome goddess. Asher grumbled inwardly, finally saying helplessly to the others, I'll take her back to the temple first, then I'll come back to you later. Arthur, you'd best be careful, it's better to maintain a bit of distance. At that moment, Merlin suddenly cautioned somewhat guiltily, watching Asher about to leave. What do you mean? Asher stopped and asked. Well. Merlin looked as if he had something to say but finally shook his head and smiled. Never mind, it's nothing. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 297, Chapter 297, The Promise, Robbing the King's Treasury. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. That was exhilarating. This era certainly has a lot of monstrous beasts. A cheerful voice suddenly came from outside, then Mordred pulled back the door curtain and entered the room. The previously lively room was now empty of people. Gilgamesh and her group had gone to the Divine Towers Hall to seek an audience with Gilgamesh, while Merlin intended to drink the wine in the room before going to the hall, so he was still sitting in the room, sipping some wine. Strange, Father King isn't back yet. Mordred looked around in confusion but couldn't find Asher. Merlin, who was resting on a stone chair, looked up when he heard the voice, and then a hint of surprise appeared in his eyes as he said, "Oh my, what a troublesome fate. To think even you've been summoned. Merlin. Why are you here?" Mordred looked at Merlin, frowning slightly, her eyes filled with confusion. "As you can see, I was summoned by Gilgamesh," Merlin said with a smile. "You must have already met your father, right?" "Of course, why?" Mordred asked, looking at Merlin with a wary expression. "No, nothing, just asking casually. Speaking of which, aren't you a bit too cautious? I'm the court mage of Britain, after all." Merlin looked puzzled. "Mordred, is there any reason for you to be so wary of me now?" "Father King told me when I was little not to believe anything Merlin says, because he's a super big liar," Mordred said. Oh dear, that's a huge misunderstanding. I'm an innocent person who has done nothing wrong," Merlin said with a troubled expression. "It must be King Arthur holding a grudge against my talent, so he deliberately slandered me." "Ha ha ha ha, don't joke, how could Father King deliberately slander you?" Mordred placed her helmet beside the table, her fingers paused slightly, then she suddenly remembered something and looked up. "Oh, right, he's Father King, but he's not the real Father King, is he?" Even she could feel the difference in Asher. The Asher summoned now wasn't the real him, he was merely a sort of clone, and a divine clone at that. "Yes, it's a bit complicated for various reasons, but as you said," Merlin said. "I see." Mordred muttered softly, seemingly pondering something. "You're not thinking about protecting him well so you can spend more time with King Arthur, are you?" Merlin couldn't help but laugh, immediately seeing through Mordred's thoughts. "What's so funny about that? Do you want a beating?" Mordred glared at Merlin, her face flushed. "Nothing, but King Arthur, even as a clone, wouldn't be so weak as to need your protection." "Is Father King strong now too?" Mordred asked in confusion. "In short, don't worry about King Arthur's problem. Just calmly accept Gilgamesh's tasks and do your own thing, that's enough. King Arthur will be fine, rest assured," Merlin said with a smile. After all, Asher's true body was still sleeping in his room in Britain. Even if he died here, he would just wake up from his dream. Unless his true body rushed here from Avalon, there wouldn't be any major problems. Mordred frowned. This Merlin guy always liked to say incomprehensible things and act mysterious. She then asked, "By the way, where is my Father King now?" Merlin pondered for a moment and then said, If nothing unexpected happens, he should be at Ishtar's temple now." "Temple? Goddess Ishtar? Who else could it be?" Merlin looked deeply in a certain direction. It was truly the right decision to summon King Arthur to this era as well. If it weren't for Asher, it wouldn't be so easy to bring Ishtar into their camp so quickly. Just as he was planning his next moves, Merlin's body suddenly trembled, then he averted his gaze and rubbed his eyes. "What's wrong?" Mordred asked in confusion. "My clairvoyance was discovered. Although it's a clone, it still possesses divine authority. Or rather, has his true body already almost completely inherited Odin's authority." Merlin muttered to himself. What a baffling guy. Listening to Merlin's words, Mordred was a bit confused. She got up and left the room, saying to Jean, who was standing quietly by the door, "Let's go, let's patrol the streets and see if there's anything we can help with." Earlier, they had gone together to hunt monstrous beasts outside the city gates. Fighting together was often one of the best ways to build camaraderie, and Mordred had grown somewhat fonder of this woman who resembled her mother. "Ash. I mean, isn't your Father King around?" Jean asked in confusion. "Ah, he said he went to the temple," Mordred said. "But since it's the goddess's temple, she probably wouldn't lay hands on Father King." Indeed," Jean nodded, with a somewhat subtle expression. It was true that she wouldn't physically lay hands on him, but honestly, she was quite afraid of her other kind of laying hands. Ever since the last time Artoria was summoned and did that in front of her, she felt very uneasy. But since it was a goddess, there shouldn't be any problem. Jean stopped thinking too much and walked onto the street with Mordred. Meanwhile, on the other side. Unbelievable. Truly unbelievable. That Merlin guy is really a perverted peeping Tom. I really want to go over there and hit him with a beam of light right now. The annoyed voice of Goddess Ishtar echoed in the temple. Her gaze was fixed on a certain spot, looking displeased. He certainly is an old lecher, truly detestable. I approve of the decision to give him a beating. Asher echoed. Anyway, there was no loss for him. If Ishtar wanted to beat Merlin, he'd let her. Let's set Merlin aside for now, and your business. Ishtar's gaze fell on Asher. Where are my offerings? I'll go to Gilgamesh to get them later, don't worry, Asher said. Taking a portion from his treasury should be enough. Treasury, huh? Ishtar looked up and pondered for a moment. Then, a faint smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and she rubbed her hands as she approached Asher. What are you doing? Noticing the faint green light in Ishtar's eyes and her mischievous grin, Asher instinctively asked. Hey, you're my attendant, aren't you, Ash? Ishtar walked up to Asher, gripping his robe, and asked, looking up slightly. No, Asher shook his head. Ishtar. But you can tell me whatever you need, and I'll try my best to satisfy you, Asher continued. Come on an adventure with me after this, Ishtar's red eyes gazed into Asher's. Let's explore that flashy golden guy's treasury together and find some good stuff. Afterwards, I'll split it with you, how does that sound? No matter how grandly you put it, it doesn't change the fact that you just want to rob him, Asher said, quite speechless. Why is this god's mind completely filled with gems? Asher wondered. What's wrong with that? It's just teaching that flashy golden guy a lesson, how about it? All right, I'll help you after this, Asher said. But don't go looting other people's gems again. When he first arrived at the temple, Asher had inquired among the common people near Uruk. Their fear of Ishtar seemed to be partly because she would seize gems from others for her own use. Ishtar's face immediately flushed, and she argued, I've never done anything so outrageous. Those are all just rumors. Let's just say they're rumors. Now, I'm going to see Gilgamesh. You can rest well in the temple for now. Asher turned to walk towards the temple exit. Ishtar suddenly called out to Asher. Do you think other humans really hate me? Asher couldn't help but smile. So this goddess actually cares about human opinions. If that's the case, why do so many bad things in the first place? Feeling Asher's gaze, Ishtar averted her eyes and whispered, well, what about it? I think everyone just holds you in awe. That's different from fear, Asher said with a smile. Ishtar was stunned for a moment, muttering, is that so? You're the city god of Uruk, after all. How about a Ridra confidence? After a brief moment of confusion, Ishtar's eyes gradually brightened. You're right. I am the city god, and it's only normal for everyone to revere and awe me, after all, I am a god. Asher looked at Ishtar, who had suddenly become confident, and swallowed the words he wanted to say. It was said that when Ishtar left Uruk, she left in her skyboat, and at that time, her unrestrained laughter could be heard almost throughout the city. This probably became a psychological trauma for many, making them feel that their goddess seemed a bit neurotic. But never mind, as long as Ishtar could cheer up, it would help with the subsequent battles. No longer looking at the gleaming-eyed goddess, Asher was about to leave, but then, Ishtar called out to him. Asher. Asher stopped. That's your true name, right? Ishtar asked. Of course, is there something? No, Ishtar's lips curved slightly. She hesitated, then finally said softly, thank you. Just mutual benefit, Asher waved his hand and left the temple. Arriving at the main hall of the Divine Tower, Asher happened to see Ritsuka Fujimaru and Mash about to leave the hall. The two clearly noticed Asher. Mash was the first to smile and say, King Arthur, you're back so soon. They had just been in the same room, so they naturally knew Asher had previously taken Ishtar back to the temple. Yes, that goddess is quite easy to get along with, Asher said. So I came out quickly. Easy to get along with. That's great. Honestly, at first, I was worried about how to get along with goddess Ishtar, Ritsuka Fujimaru said, placing her hand on her rather heaving chest, looking relieved. Did Gilgamesh agree to your assistance? Asher asked. Yes, Miss Siduri is about to take us to a room to see, and then we'll probably get busy. That's good. If you have any difficulties, you can come find me. Anyway, our living quarters should be quite close, Asher said with a smile. Thank you, senpai. Mash bowed politely, which made Asher freeze for a moment, staring blankly at the girl. Ah, is this child an angel? After living so long, finally, he could finally become someone's senpai. Asher felt deeply moved for a moment. Truly worthy of Lancelot's child. Asher, how much longer are you going to keep this king waiting outside? Gilgamesh's voice came from the hall, interrupting their casual chat. Asher sighed. What a king who likes to order people around. He still wanted to experience what it felt like to be looked up to as a senpai a little longer. We'll talk about anything else later. I'm going in now. Asher reluctantly bid farewell to Mash and Ritsuka Fujimaru and stepped into the hall. Large groups of monstrous beasts have appeared in the north again. What troublesome creatures. Immediately reduced the defense line of the territory. Gilgamesh was looking at a clay tablet in his hand and giving orders. At this moment, Asher had entered the hall. He glanced at the seemingly busy Gilgamesh and then very straightforwardly asked, Goddess Ishtar has been settled. Is there anything else you need me to do? After all, if he had to wait for Gilgamesh to finish his political affairs, he probably wouldn't get a result even after several days and nights. And the person who just called him in was Gilgamesh, so he must have something important to entrust to him. Well done. The amount of offerings you proposed to that goddess, just inform Siduri about it later, and she will handle the offerings, Gilgamesh said, his gaze still on the clay tablet in his hand. Thank you for your understanding, but if possible, I would also like some gems, Ashur said. I borrowed some gems from Miss Siduri earlier to trade with Ishtar. This time, I'll return them all at once. Granted. Upon hearing Gilgamesh's reply, Ashur felt a subtle sensation in his heart. The thought of potentially having to help that somewhat neurotic goddess rob Gilgamesh's treasury made him feel a little ashamed. Just then, a clay tablet flew swiftly towards Ashur. Ashur reacted quickly and immediately raised his hand to catch the clay tablet. This king is speaking to you, did you hear? Gilgamesh's voice came from the throne. What did you say? Ashur asked. Gilgamesh couldn't help but rub his forehead. Never mind, this king will tell you again. Listen carefully, I just received news that a new goddess has appeared in the dense forest to the south, in the city of Uar. Only by understanding her information can this king formulate a corresponding plan. Simply put, you want me to go investigate. Are you unwilling? Gilgamesh asked. Among the servants this king has summoned, you are the most suitable. If you cannot go, then others will have to. Never mind, I'll go, Ashur said. There was no way he could let Mordred or Jean go, could he? The other party was a goddess, if they went and something happened to them, Ashur would go crazy. Even if they were currently manifesting as servants, he didn't want to see them sacrifice themselves before his eyes. Therefore, going himself would be more reassuring. At least if he died, his true body would still be there, and at worst, his true body could just rush to Uruk. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 298, Chapter 298, Ashur, the Mother Beast Specialist, deploys. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available fire. After a smooth night, Ashur set off to leave Uruk. It's worth mentioning that Ishtar, for some inexplicable reason, came to find Ashur last night, and they chatted about many things. She seemed quite interested in his past life experiences, talking for most of the night. No, to be precise, it wasn't Ishtar, but Ereshkigal. At night, Ereshkigal could manifest by borrowing Ishtar's body. Last night, after Ishtar sneezed, Ereshkigal's true form appeared, though Ashur didn't expose her identity. He found it quite interesting, and also somewhat feared her getting angry if he revealed her. After leaving the room, Ashur originally intended to head straight for the forest, but as he was about to leave, Merlin blocked his path. What do you want? Ashur asked, annoyed, the moment he saw Merlin. He felt he had been tricked. He thought he could slack off in Uruk, but it seemed he was doing more work than Merlin every day. Arthur, you seem to be in a bad mood. Merlin asked with a smile. Yeah, I can't help it. It's because I saw your face first thing this morning, Ashur chuckled. Oh, I'm so sorry. Wait. Are you disliking me, Arthur? He truly didn't know if Merlin was just slow to catch on or intentionally playing along with Ashur. He lightly clapped his hands. All right, let's put that aside for now. I want to ask you, where are you heading now, Arthur? Gilgamesh's task is for me to go to the jungle of Uar to confirm the identity of the newly appeared goddess, Ashur said. Ah, that's troublesome then, Merlin scratched his head in distress. Actually, I also have something to trouble you with. Solve it yourself, Ashur said decisively. Oh dear, don't say that. I've helped you quite a bit, haven't I? Merlin looked friendly, but Ashur just rolled his eyes. Had Merlin helped him a lot? He didn't seem to recall any of it. Actually, if I could, I wouldn't want to ask you, but I have no choice. If I were to do it, there would be a certain risk. Merlin's tone grew more serious towards the end. Arthur, I have a very important task to entrust to you. Ashur originally didn't want to bother with Merlin, but seeing his solemn expression, he finally reluctantly said, Tell me first. Actually, it's like this. Merlin explained roughly. And upon hearing the end, Ashur couldn't help but look at Merlin twice, saying, So, what you're saying is, we actually have an even greater crisis, but you've been delaying its arrival. In other words, you're delaying Tiamat's awakening. Merlin nodded. Just as you said. To be honest, I don't feel like you're the type to sacrifice yourself like this, Ashur said. You can boldly remove, feel, and like, Arthur, Merlin said with a smile. I'm only doing it for myself. If human history is destroyed, there will be no observable creatures in this world. I can't possibly look out at a garden from my tower every day, can I? That sounds like a reason you would act, Asher nodded lightly. And then, what do you want me to do? Although we can currently stabilize the mother's awakening, once this current body of mine dies, that Genesis goddess will awaken from her slumber, and my combat power isn't particularly high, so. Merlin slowly said something. Asher froze, then couldn't help but raise his voice. You want me to take your place and hypnotize Tiamat? Yes, that's right, Merlin nodded seriously. How about it? Not good at all, Asher shook his head decisively. That's a Genesis goddess. You're actually asking me to go before a Genesis goddess and, based on your previous actions, continue to hypnotize Tiamat. Trust me, Arthur, I wouldn't harm you, Merlin said with a serious expression. This is also for the sake of human history. It's strange coming from you. And I don't know how to set up the dream prison you mentioned either, Asher gently refused. This idea was too insane, it wasn't a joke. Asher felt his heart might race just by facing the Genesis goddess, let alone having to stay there for a long time to hypnotize Tiamat. I've already set up a dream prison for Tiamat, so you don't need to set it up again. You just need to continuously supply magic to the dream prison every once in a while, Merlin said. In short, that way she won't wake up so quickly. What about the goddess in the forest of Uar? Who else can go besides me? Asher asked. Me, or Mash and the others can go. You have more important things to do, and I'll explain it to Gilgamesh so that everyone doesn't end up thinking you're slacking off, Merlin said. And think about it, this way, you won't have to be constantly rushed by the king to go here and there. You just have to stay in one place, okay? And that way you'll eventually get the information you want. Merlin coaxed. This is a task only you can complete. Odin is a chief god, although he isn't particularly proficient in dreams, he has a high aptitude for learning. If I teach you, you can even quickly learn the method of the dream prison. This way, you can even create beautiful dreams for the Genesis goddess, extending her awakening time even further. I have to say, Merlin indeed persuaded Asher. Odin truly possessed a high talent for magic. In the past, Asher's ability to quickly grasp magic was also related to Odin. Besides Merlin, he was indeed the most suitable candidate. How about it? Merlin's voice sounded again, pulling Asher back to reality. He rubbed his temples, looked up at Merlin, and then asked, the magic spell. Actually, I've set it to a spell that's quite easy to remember, so don't worry. Listen carefully, Arthur, the magic spell is, Artoria, dinner's ready. Asher, huh? That truly was an easy-to-remember magic spell, though if Lily found out, she'd probably want to beat Merlin to death. So you agree, Arthur? Merlin asked tentatively. Actually, this is beneficial for you too. At least that place will block out all images and such. Merlin then muttered to himself. Images? Ah, nothing, Merlin waved his hand. What do you think of the proposal I just mentioned, Arthur? Asher lowered his head, lost in thought for a brief moment, then sighed. I understand. Take me there. I knew you'd agree, King Arthur, Merlin said with a brilliant smile. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 299, Feeding Tiamat a Holy Grail. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. Where is this place? Asher walked along a small path. He looked around, and there was nothing but blackness before his eyes, as if he were in a deep ocean. As you can see, Merlin spread his hands. This is Tiamat's resting place. But you don't have to worry about the volume, she won't wake up that easily, rest assured. I must be crazy to come to a place like this with you, Asher said with resentment. And didn't you already hypnotize Tiamat? Why did I have to come along? That's why I said, it's for insurance. Rather than me continuously hypnotizing her, it's more reliable for you to do it. At least in terms of combat power, you're much stronger than I am now. If anything happens to me, there's no need to worry about problems here, Merlin said. Because Merlin had hypnotized Tiamat, if Merlin's clone died, Tiamat would immediately awaken. This was why he asked Asher to take his place. In terms of magical mastery, Asher might not be as good as Merlin, but his learning ability was even stronger than Merlin's. You trust Odin, not me, don't you? No, Arthur, Merlin said with a smile. I would trust your main body just the same. Because of the white dragon furnace heart formed by the combined magic of the white dragon and Odin. Oh dear, why must you state it so explicitly? Merlin feigned a sigh of distress, adding, by the way, you don't have to worry about magic. I'll explain the reason to the king, so you can freely squander your magic. Actually, for safety, your main body should have come, but that would be too dangerous, Merlin said. And, your main body probably still can't be used. As he spoke the last part, his voice grew softer and softer, but in that quiet space, Asher still heard Merlin's murmur. He immediately turned around and asked, "What do you mean by, still can't be used? Are you up to something again?" "Not me, it's Scotty," Merlin quickly waved his hand. "Scotty." Merlin nodded and said, "Simply put, Scotty is personally guiding Odin's magic for your own use. It's estimated to take about 5 more days to fully integrate the magic." "How is she helping me?" Asher couldn't help but ask. "It's a rather special method, seemingly the result of a discussion between Odin and Scotty. But don't worry too much, it's nothing improper," Merlin added. However, Merlin's words only made Asher more curious. Scotty helping him guide magic, how exactly was she doing it? Anyway, you can ask them about it later. "We're here," Merlin stopped. Asher looked up, and upon seeing the Genesis goddess before him, his pupils involuntarily widened slightly. This is too big, isn't it?" Yes, what fell into Asher's eyes, though not a colossal creature thousands of meters tall, was certainly not a height easily reached by ordinary humans. "No, the current Tiamat is not large," Merlin shook his head. "If she were to truly awaken one day, you would know just how massive she is. But that's just a hypothesis. As long as she remains asleep, there's no problem. Everything will be over once we get the Holy Grail." Merlin smiled. "Then I'll leave her to you, Arthur." "Wait a moment." Asher stopped Merlin, who was about to leave. "Aren't you going to confirm whether the hypnosis magic you just taught me works before you go? So little confidence in yourself." "All right, then try it now. I'll be watching from the side, so rest assured, don't feel any pressure. Even if Tiamat accidentally wakes up because of you and the world is destroyed, don't take it too hard, ha ha ha. You're doing this on purpose, aren't you?" Asher glared at Merlin. With Merlin saying that, Asher suddenly felt even more pressured. If he really made a mistake, wouldn't the sin be immense? Never mind, as long as Merlin was here, there shouldn't be any problems. He'd try the spell he just learned. Asher looked up at Tiamat. She still seemed to be in a deep slumber. Her cyan hair cascaded naturally over her delicate skin. The pair of horns on her head looked particularly massive, and she had pointed ears like an elf, but from her appearance, she didn't seem too different from a human. "Artoria, dinner's ready." As Asher chanted the spell, a faint, prison-like light formed around the sleeping Tiamat in the distance, vanishing in an instant. "How was it?" "Simple, right?" Merlin patted Asher's shoulder. "Generally, there won't be any problems. After you're done, you can leave here. Or you can commit suicide, but suicide will make your main body feel pain, so I don't really recommend it." As he spoke the last part, Merlin touched his face, which still bore the imprint of Foe's kick from 2 days ago. "Oh, by the way, though it's highly unlikely, if by some accident Tiamat does wake up, you can try to give her some sweet dreams. It will make her sleep more soundly. The spell is, time to rest for healthy growth, Artoria." "So, how obsessed are you with Lily?" Asher complained, somewhat speechless. And as Asher complained, Merlin had already waved goodbye with a smile and left. Watching Merlin leave, Asher looked up again at the sleeping Genesis goddess not far away. Even though Asher was summoned as a god, he felt considerable pressure, even with the other party currently in a state of slumber. And now I just stand here staring into space. Asher fell into brief thought. Although Merlin said to inject magic into her dream prison periodically to ensure she slept soundly, Asher didn't know how often to chant the spell and could only act on his own judgment. At this moment, Tiamat, who had been in deep slumber, suddenly frowned slightly, her small mouth pouting a little, looking as if she were angry. Although it looked quite cute, it startled Asher immensely. He thought Tiamat had woken up the moment Merlin left. Fortunately, it was all just his overthinking. After a moment, Tiamat's eyebrows relaxed again, and she seemed to have re-entered her dream. A sweet dream, huh? Recalling the second spell Merlin had just mentioned, Asher thought for a moment, and a staff appeared in his hand. This was a branch of the World Tree, which not only Scotty but also Odin possessed. He softly said, "Time to rest for healthy growth, Artoria." One had to admit, inserting such an out-of-place phrase into such a serious scene was rather odd. Asher felt that if Lily knew Merlin had set the spell to such words, she'd probably beat Merlin up after returning. Thinking of this, Asher couldn't help but chuckle softly. Imagining that scene was quite amusing, Lily furiously grabbing Merlin and giving him a good beating or something. As Asher was thinking about such things, he suddenly felt his vision become somewhat blurry. A flash of electricity seemed to cross his mind, and his brain instantly became somewhat muddled. Could it be that he was out of magic already? Asher plopped down, covering his forehead, his vision now completely obscured. But it wasn't long before his blurred vision returned to clarity. What just happened? My magic is still abundant, why would this happen? Asher muttered to himself, then looked up again. When he saw the scene before him, he suddenly froze. After a long moment, he couldn't help but rub his eyes and look up again. What appeared before him was northwest longer the place Asher and Merlin had just arrived at, but a completely unfamiliar world. An unfamiliar, yet vast world. No, it wasn't entirely unfamiliar, at least Asher had been here for several days and should have a little understanding of this world. What appeared before Asher was Mesopotamia. Just then, a beautiful singing voice echoed across the vast land from a distance. Asher sharply looked up in the direction of the sound, only to see a massive creature standing quietly on the surface of the sea, singing. Tiamat. Asher's eyes were filled with confusion as he looked around. The sky was overcast, lead-colored clouds obscuring the light. Not a single person was seen in the entire world, and the sea was shrouded in gray mist. Asher stood alone by the sea, waves crashing against his face, yet there was no coolness whatsoever. Everything around him was gray, a vast expanse of gray, only Asher was in color. He touched his face, which should have been wet with water droplets, but he didn't feel the droplets that had just splashed on his face. Because the water droplets passed right through him. Asher seemed to understand something and looked up again at the Genesis god standing quietly on the surface of the sea in the distance. Could this be Tiamat's dream? He still hadn't quite grasped what Merlin's spell was all about, his body simply knew how to use it naturally, which stemmed from Odin's exceptional learning ability. He also wondered if something went wrong when using the sweet dream magic. Undoubtedly, what he was seeing now was indeed Tiamat's dream. Tiamat on the surface of the sea slightly tilted her head, glanced at Asher, then withdrew her gaze and looked out at the land of Mesopotamia again. Almost instantly, Asher felt a jolt, countless goosebumps appearing all over his body, as he stared intently at Tiamat. Did she just look at me? Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 Power Stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping Power Stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 300, Elder Trait EX. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. A cold wind swept across the gloomy sky. Tiamat's gaze swept towards Asher, her red cross-shaped pupils shining as clear as a holy spring, her half-open lips opening and closing like blooming peach blossoms, enchanting and mesmerizing. She let out another sound, as clear as a silver bell, like flowing water, like a song. She appeared pure and elegant, sacred and inviolable, inspiring awe in all who beheld her. This was Tiamat, the progenitor goddess of Mesopotamia, the mother of all life. Under Tiamat's casual glance, Asher's body stiffened for a moment. It wasn't until she withdrew her gaze that his body slowly relaxed again. No, that shouldn't be possible. This should be a dream, so even Tiamat shouldn't be able to see me. Asher quickly shook his head, dispelling his earlier fear. If I'm not mistaken, this must be Tiamat's dream. But what kind of dream is this? He looked up at Tiamat, who was gazing in a certain direction, and couldn't help but wonder to himself, and what is she looking at right now? Filled with many questions, Asher finally mustered his courage and walked towards the sea. He tried to summon Sleipnir but failed. Clearly, because it was a dream, external objects could not be summoned. Asher tried to lightly leap, and his body instantly transformed into a white dragon. He floated effortlessly in the air, flying towards the progenitor goddess standing silently on the sea. There was nothing to worry about. He just needed to stay calm. Perhaps he might even uncover Tiamat's secrets. The closer he got to Tiamat, the more Asher felt an inexplicable pressure. Even in a dream, seeing that giant being standing silently on the sea surface still evoked a sense of oppression from the bottom of his heart. And the most terrifying thing was, although Tiamat's current form was enormous, it was clearly not her true size. If fully unleashed, Tiamat's body could probably encompass the entire Indian Ocean. Psychologically, there was immense pressure, but Asher did not stop advancing. He was merely an observer now. Even if he could see everything in the dream, he could not interfere, so there was no need to worry. This was evident from the fact that he felt no coldness when walking on the sea earlier. In this dream, he was merely an onlooker. Tiamat's voice resonated across the vast land once more. Unbeknownst to him, Asher had already floated close to Tiamat on the sea surface. Listening to her song-like cry, he couldn't help but feel confused. So, what exactly was she saying? The white dragon tilted its head and echoed, but it was clearly useless. This was like encountering a meowing cat on the street. If you meow back, it wouldn't understand. It might even cautiously observe you with a look of concern for the mentally challenged, thinking, is this human an idiot? What is she looking at? Asher followed Tiamat's gaze, and his eyes soon fell upon the gods in the distance. In that direction, the gods seemed to be holding some kind of ceremony, looking exceptionally lively. Then, they all respectfully toasted towards Tiamat, seemingly expressing their sincere reverence for the progenitor goddess. Hearing Tiamat's cry again, Asher fell into a brief silence. Although he didn't understand what she was saying, he could roughly comprehend the feeling, so he could tentatively guess what she was expressing. It must be a voice of joy. At this time, the gods still respected Tiamat, and Mother Tiamat also cherished her children. This pure woman probably never understood until the very end why the gods wanted to kill her. Asher stood suspended in midair, gazing at the distant, bustling scene. Unconsciously, the sky gradually darkened, but the gods' gathering had not yet ended. The sun god Shamash brought light to the dim earth, allowing the gathering to continue until it was almost dawn before it finally concluded. These gods are really noisy, Asher muttered. If he had to describe it, it was probably like a classroom when the teacher wasn't present. The clamor completely subsided, and the world returned to silence. Tiamat's mouth was slightly agape, and a beautiful song, like the alluring song of a siren, emanated from the sea. Then, Tiamat became completely still, closing her eyes, seemingly returning to slumber. For her, a beautiful dream is simply being able to sleep peacefully. Asher murmured thoughtfully. Perhaps Merlin's successful hypnosis of Tiamat also had an element of her willingness in it. Asher shook his head, his gaze sweeping over the land again. Speaking of which, how do I get out now? Should he shout a spell again? Asher's mouth was slightly agape, about to speak again, but at that moment, Tiamat, who had just closed her eyes, opened them again. She tilted her head slightly and looked towards Asher. The white dragon's vertical pupils suddenly contracted. Could Tiamat really see him? I should be an observer, though. Come here for a moment. A gentle and clear voice sounded, but for some reason, Asher felt as though he could understand what Tiamat said this time. Is she talking to me? Asher looked back in the direction of Tiamat's gaze, but saw nothing but the endless sea. Come here, could she really be calling me? Asher finally realized the seriousness of the situation. Tiamat seemed to be able to see him. Come here, my child, this time, her tone sounded quite displeased. Rather than a mother, she sounded more like a willful child, except this child's size was immeasurably larger than Asher's. Perhaps because this is Tiamat's dream, and she's treating me as part of the dream. Asher suddenly thought. Only this could explain why Tiamat could see him. No choice, I'll listen to her for now. Facing an existence of this caliber, there was simply no possibility of escaping, and if he accidentally woke her from her beautiful dream, the trouble would be immense. So, the white dragon flapped its wings and approached Tiamat, finally coming before her. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 301, This is Motherly Love. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. Dragons are colossal creatures, capable of making the earth tremble with a mere twitch of a foot. However, when the white dragon flapped its wings and flew before Tiamat, it appeared remarkably tiny. Well, if one had to compare, it was like the size difference between a human and an ant. The size difference is truly immense, Asher couldn't help but grumble inwardly, looking at the creature before him. When Vortigern first appeared on Earth, he brought an intense sense of pressure, but the pressure emanating from the progenitor goddess before him was more terrifying than any being Asher had ever faced. He hadn't even felt such pressure from any other deity. Why can you see me? Asher asked Tiamat. Despite feeling reverence and a hint of fear, he couldn't just float there in front of Tiamat without speaking, could he? I don't know, a familiar feeling. Asher was startled. Speaking of which, in Mesopotamian mythology, Tiamat seemed to be a giant dragon with a dragon-like body. However, while Tiamat had the appearance of a dragon, her essence was divine. She felt a familiar sensation, probably because he was currently in dragon form and also possessed divinity. Or had she already realized that this beautiful dream was created by him? Are you afraid of me? The pleasant voice resonated in his ears again. Tiamat's clear eyes reflected the white dragon's form. Her mouth slightly parted, and her voice softly rang out again, why? It sounded as if it were filled with unease. You've misunderstood, I'm not afraid of you, I just hold you in awe. Asher immediately reacted, replying instantly, under normal circumstances, everyone would hold you in awe, wouldn't they? Tiamat tilted her head slightly, mother, and child. Was she trying to imply a child's attitude towards its mother? Although it's a little different, it should be roughly the same meaning. The white dragon made a gesture similar to a human resting their chin in their hand, then nodded gently. Yes, exactly. Are you sleepy? What do you mean? Asher asked. It's time to sleep. Asher looked up at the gloomy sky, where dark clouds covered everything, with only a few cracks allowing a hint of light to peek through. It seemed like a good time to sleep. Then I won't disturb you. Have a good dream, Tiamat, Asher said, politely bowing his head slightly. Although he wasn't sure if continuing to sleep within a beautiful dream would lead to a dream within a dream scenario. AAA, are you leaving? I just need to stay on the ground. I can't keep flying in the sky, can I? It's exhausting, Asher said, pointing at his wings. You can sleep on my head. Asher's eyelids twitched slightly, and he quickly shook his head. Even if he had 100 times the courage, he wouldn't dare to sleep on Tiamat's head. Wasn't that disrespectful to a deity? Although he didn't believe in gods, for some reason, he still held reverence for this progenitor goddess before him. That's it, I'll stay on the ground and won't run around. You can rest assured and sleep. After the white dragon finished speaking, it flapped its wings, intending to leave. But at that moment, the previously calm sea suddenly churned with huge waves. A tsunami swept down, pushing the white dragon, who was trying to fly away, back towards Tiamat. The white dragon quickly shook its body, like a cat fresh from a bath, spinning rapidly like a top to shake off the seawater. Its black and white dragon scales shone with an alluring luster even under the dim sky. Did Tiamat have something else in mind? After shaking off the water, Asher couldn't help but look at Tiamat, who had prevented him from flying back to the ground. Don't go, sleep here. This was truly a bit much to ask. He couldn't possibly fly in the sky all day, could he? Asher shook his head, feeling a bit depressed. Life is hard, sighs the white dragon. After a moment of silence, Asher tried his best to show what he thought was a good smile and said, I won't leave, I'm just resting on the ground. You saw me earlier, didn't you? Asher had thought it was a hallucination when Tiamat turned her head earlier, but now, he realized that she had probably discovered him back then. Stay. Faced with Tiamat's request, Asher finally had to nod and say, I understand, I'll stay here. You can rest assured and sleep. Tiamat looked at the white dragon curiously for a few moments, then reached out and gently stroked the white dragon's head. Good child. It must be said, even though the other party was a progenitor goddess, this action made Asher feel incredibly embarrassed. Fortunately, the white dragon couldn't show a blush. It merely awkwardly avoided Tiamat's stroking hand and slightly raised its proud dragon head. I am not your child. Be good, don't fuss, Asher. Does she see me as a rebellious child? At this moment, Asher suddenly noticed that the gigantic creature before him was slowly shrinking, appearing much smaller than before. She covered her mouth and let out a tiny yawn, then her eyes kept closing and reopening, as if she didn't want to fall asleep so quickly. Don't worry, I'm here, Asher said, smiling at the sight. Aren't you sleeping? I'll sleep after you fall asleep, Asher said, looking down at the shimmering sea below. Even if he really wanted to sleep, he couldn't just float in midair. But Tiamat, though seemingly simple, was not foolish. She immediately understood Asher's thoughts and opened her arms to him. You can rest well in my embrace. Asher was stunned, and his gaze met hers for a moment. Only then did he snap out of it and immediately shook his head, but before he could refuse, a pillar of water from the ocean below struck Asher from behind, gently pushing the white dragon towards Tiamat. Release it, Mother will protect you, Tiamat spoke again. Clearly, she thought Asher had transformed into a white dragon to protect himself. Under the gaze of those red cross-shaped pupils, Asher had no choice but to dispel his dragon transformation, appearing quite disheveled. This was understandable, suddenly being blasted towards Tiamat by a water pillar, and then having her cradle him like a child, stroking his head and rubbing his face. Anyone would feel embarrassed. Asher looked up at Tiamat's face. Her expression was completely enveloped in happiness, looking more like a gentle mother than a progenitor goddess. Tiamat extended a soft, boneless hand, stroking Asher's face while softly murmuring something, as if coaxing a child to sleep. This was truly embarrassing. Asher only wished Tiamat would fall asleep quickly so he could escape this embrace filled with maternal love. Wait a minute. As if something had just occurred to him, Asher's eyes suddenly widened slightly, and he had a very bad feeling. Am I going to have to sleep with her until Merlin comes to save me? Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 Power Stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping Power Stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 302, Tiamat, you're tired. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. Ereshkigal sat on a stone chair with her knees hugged, staring blankly at the night sky. It had been a full day since Asher left Uruk. Most people didn't know where he had gone, only hearing from Ritsuka Fujimaru that Senpai is carrying out a very important mission. But what mission could be more important than the problems here in Uruk? Ereshkigal racked her brain but couldn't figure it out. It was said that Ishtar had furiously ridden her celestial boat this morning to find Merlin, questioning him about the whereabouts of her attendant. This was because Merlin was the last person to be seen with Asher. However, Merlin didn't explain, only saying that Asher was currently in a very safe place, carrying out a very important mission. Frankly, under normal circumstances, important missions should be accompanied by danger, so Merlin's words completely failed to convince Ishtar. Instead, they angered her so much that she wanted to hang Merlin on the celestial boat to punish him. How dare he conceal important secrets from a goddess? But alas, Merlin was incompetent at everything except escaping. If he truly wanted to run, it was hard to catch him. Most importantly, Gilgamesh had also tacitly approved of Merlin taking Asher away, suggesting he had already guessed something. Sigh, where did he go? Ereshkigal murmured to herself. The cold night wind blew past, accompanied by a flurry of pink petals drifting towards the sky. The white-haired mage peered around cautiously, and after confirming no one was there, quickly pulled back a curtain and entered. A room. Mordred and Jean aren't here, are they? He was still carefully scanning his surroundings as he spoke. He looked quite handsome, but for some reason, he appeared timid and hesitant. They just left. Anna, standing silently in the corner, looked at Merlin, a pair of bright eyes revealed beneath her hood. Upon learning that Asher had been taken away by Merlin and hadn't returned, Mordred was furious. She had finally seen her father, only for him to disappear after just a few words. If not for the sake of the greater good, she would have truly wanted to chop that foolish Merlin to death with her sword. In comparison, Jean was much calmer, though it was unclear if she secretly held a grudge. In any case, because Asher had been quietly taken away by Merlin and there had been no news of him since, Merlin felt uneasy walking on the streets these days. He constantly felt as though someone might jump out at any moment, wanting to kill him and demand to know where he had tricked the person into going. Why won't you tell them? Anna asked. Because it's a very important matter. The fewer people who know, the better. Merlin spread his hands. It's also true that you don't have to worry about his safety. It's just a matter of periodically transferring magic, nothing special needs to be done. Important matter, that you'd entrust to someone else. Anna looked up at Merlin. You're clearly a big liar. Merlin nodded as if it were obvious, of course. He's someone I trust deeply. After all, he's someone Lily believes in, so there won't be any problems. Moreover, if we can solve this problem in a better way, that would be even better, Merlin continued. Anna slightly furrowed her brows, not understanding Merlin's words. Oh dear, when did I start saying such things? Even though I know it's impossible, Merlin suddenly laughed and shook his head. Let's just stick to the original plan. After he finished speaking, he stepped out of the room. Where are you going? Anna asked. Mash and the others are preparing to explore the jungle to uncover the truth about the goddess. I'm a little worried, so I'll go along and observe for a bit, Merlin said with a smile. Are you going to miss your big brother? Anna looked at Merlin. Go to hell. But after saying that, she still silently followed him. 58 dark clouds just drifted across the sky. 8 of them were oddly shaped, 3 looked like they were missing a corner, and 1 was very, very large. Asher idly gazed up at the sky, counting clouds. It wasn't that he was bored to this extent, but he was forced to count them. If he didn't pass the time this way, he'd die of boredom. Being held in someone's arms and coaxed to sleep like a child. Honestly, if he were 3 or 4 years younger, Asher wouldn't mind, but he was an adult now. This was truly a bit embarrassing. Fortunately, this was a dream. The scene of Tiamat holding Asher and emanating her motherly aura wouldn't be seen by others, not even Merlin. This was Asher's only psychological comfort. At least he didn't have to worry about this scene being seen by others, nor would it make people think he still hadn't grown up and needed his mother to coax him to sleep. Listening to Tiamat humming softly while holding him, and feeling her hand seemingly combing his hair, Asher at one point wanted to escape from Tiamat's embrace. No, to be precise, he had already tried, but failed every time. Whenever Asher tried to leave, the ocean below would surge up like a massive curtain, as if to say, try taking one more step. So, Asher had no choice but to obediently accept Tiamat's embrace, hoping she would rest soon. However, he had been in Tiamat's arms for most of the day, and she showed no signs of sleeping, causing Asher's patience to wear thin. When are you going to sleep, Tiamat? Asher finally couldn't help but ask. Call me mother. Asher fell silent, remaining quiet. AAA this time, it held no meaning, but sounded rather confused, as if wondering why Asher refused to call her mother. Asher sighed inwardly, then finally gave up and said, Mother. Can I ask you a question, Mother? Asher asked. Ask. Why are you so good to me? Shouldn't I be considered an outsider? Tiamat's mouth slightly parted, and she spoke in a gentle tone. Likes this dream very much. Asher seemed to realize something, muttering, You wouldn't happen to know that I created this dream, would you? Leia, very happy, you are a good child. It seemed that the sweet dream he had woven for Tiamat satisfied her. But why didn't Merlin do this back then? Asher suddenly wondered. He suddenly felt a wet, soft touch on his cheek. Asher looked up and saw Tiamat gently licking his cheek with her soft little tongue, like a kitten. Asher immediately pressed on Tiamat's face to stop her. Can you please not lick my face? It feels weird, Asher said, wiping the wetness from his face with his hand. This wasn't some dog or cat grooming its child with its tongue. Tiamat's action was simply too strange. Also, if possible, please don't keep touching my face. Asher grabbed Tiamat's hand, stopping her actions. Tiamat's hand was covered with a glove-like fabric, connected to her upper body clothing, but touching her hand through the fabric felt as if he were directly touching skin. Her hands were soft and smooth, with a slightly cool touch. Was this fabric on her hand actually skin or just regular fabric? Asher couldn't help but knead Tiamat's soft little hand twice more. But he still couldn't confirm it. Don't touch there, it's strange. It's surprising you'd feel shy, and I only touched your palm, Asher muttered to himself, speechless, and released Tiamat's hand. He hadn't even said anything about being held like a baby in Tiamat's arms. Sleep. But I'm not tired, Asher said. No, you're tired. I'm really not tired. AAA, good child, sleep. What a willful mother. Asher mumbled to himself, then suddenly seemed to remember something and looked at Tiamat, who appeared gentle. It was a rare opportunity to have such close contact with Tiamat. Could he perhaps take this chance to persuade her to abandon her desire for revenge against humanity? Wouldn't that be a happy ending for everyone? Could it be? Was this also Merlin's plan? No, even Merlin couldn't have predicted this far, let alone known that he would actually enter Tiamat's dream. Asher quickly dismissed his earlier thought, then gazed at Tiamat's face. Regardless, his current mission was extremely important. More important than anything he had done before, so he had to be careful, absolutely could not anger Tiamat. After careful consideration, Asher ultimately did not immediately bring up the matter of revenge, nor did he ask Tiamat about her current thoughts on humanity. Everything still needed to proceed step by step. He had only been in this dream for less than a day, he needed to wait until his relationship with Tiamat improved before considering the topic. This was truly a long and arduous journey. Asher couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 Power Stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping Power Stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 303, Difficult to Persuade. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. The white dragon raised its proud head and let out a cry, then tumbled and spun in midair, stretching its free wings. These past few days had truly suffocated Asher. 3 whole days. Asher was forcefully slept for 3 entire days. He clearly wasn't tired, yet Tiamat refused to let go, insisting that he was tired. It was that kind of tired where your mom thinks you're tired. After finally enduring until Tiamat fell asleep, Asher thought he could take the opportunity to sneak away. However, in her sleep, she held him even tighter, making it impossible to break free. Actually, it wouldn't have been a problem to truly break free, but he was afraid Tiamat might have a bad temper when waking up, so he could only try to carefully slip out of her embrace, but he failed, and eventually just gave up struggling. Therefore, it was only when Tiamat finally woke up that Asher could at last leave her embrace and feel the long-lost freedom. What were you saying just now? Tiamat looked at the white dragon flying in midair, asking with confusion. Asher couldn't help but be momentarily speechless, then chuckled, nothing, just making some sounds. Having listened to Mother Tiamat sing so much these past 2 days, Asher felt he was getting used to it, and even wanted to try singing that way, so he had just given it a try. Tiamat had been watching the white dragon flying in the air, but then her gaze suddenly shifted to the other side, the direction where the gods were. AAA. Tiamat suddenly made a sound, and the sea surface churned with waves. Asher hesitated for a moment, stopped his flying, and looked in the direction of Tiamat's gaze. The gods had started a new gathering, looking quite lively. Quad A. Are you saying, you want me to eliminate them? Asher asked. After receiving Tiamat's confirmed reply, Asher troubledly covered his forehead. He only knew how to create a sweet dream for Tiamat, but he didn't know how to weave one. Logically, that should be something only Merlin could do. I'll try. Recalling the 2 spells Merlin had taught him, Asher once again chanted a spell to persecute Artoria, while silently imagining the scene of eliminating the gods in his mind. Then, the previously lively gathering instantly vanished, as if the entire world had become quiet. It was that simple. Asher couldn't help but murmur to himself. Noticing Tiamat calling him, he lightly floated over to her. Tiamat reached out and stroked Asher's head. Perhaps she felt the texture wasn't quite right. She made another sound, asking Asher to undo his dragon transformation. Then, after Asher undid his dragon transformation, Tiamat began a new round of head patting. It seemed that for her, this was her way of encouraging Asher. AAAA, very perfect world, you are a good child. While softly singing, she continued to stroke Asher's head. Perhaps feeling her current size was still a bit too large, Tiamat once again reduced her body by a circle. It seemed Tiamat truly liked peace and quiet. It made sense. Sweet dreams are created based on one's inner thoughts, and Tiamat's sweet dream was this simple, just enough silence. As for the gods who initially appeared in this sweet dream, it was probably because Tiamat wasn't bothered by them at first, but in the following days, they became increasingly noisy, which annoyed Tiamat. Actually, if you want peace and quiet, I should leave too, Asher mumbled. Different, quiet, good child. Does that mean he's a quiet good child? Asher couldn't help but shake his head. I'm hardly a good child. He had only come to this place because he listened to Merlin, and entering this dream was just an accident. Helping her create a sweet dream was just to make her sleep soundly and not destroy the world. Leia. Tiamat suddenly pressed Asher's head, then pushed his face onto her ample chest, gently stroking his head. She looked as if she were overflowing with maternal love. Asher pressed his hands against Tiamat's shoulders, struggling for a long time before finally breathing fresh air. He turned, took a deep breath, slowly exhaled, and looked back at Tiamat, saying helplessly, next time, if possible, please be gentler. Tiamat had almost suffocated Asher in her embrace just now. We'll pay attention, sorry. Asher couldn't help but smile at this, raising his hand to pat her head. It's all right, just be more careful next time. This time it had no meaning, only expressing her joy. At this moment, Asher's hand, stroking Tiamat, suddenly paused. Why did it suddenly feel like his role as a senior figure had reversed with hers? However, could he use this opportunity to probe her? To see her views on humanity? Looking at Tiamat's happy face, Asher mustered his courage and softly said, Mother, what do you think of humans? Bad, dislike. When humanity was mentioned, Tiamat's mood clearly darkened significantly. But I'm just an ordinary human, Asher said again. Tiamat looked at Asher with a slight confusion, gently shaking her head. You are a fusion of dragon and god. Why do you dislike humans? Asher couldn't help but ask. If he could know the reason, perhaps he could find a way to dissuade her. Tiamat cried out again. They tried to kill me. Humans are many bad people. There are good people among humans too. No one dislikes you now, Asher said. Don't talk about this anymore. Hate all humans. Humans don't like me, so I hate humans too. Destroy everything. Looking at the suddenly incredibly agitated Tiamat, Asher quickly comforted her. I understand, calm down, mother. We won't talk about humans anymore, okay? Tiamat's emotions slowly returned to their usual gentleness, as if nothing had happened. Asher couldn't help but sigh softly. It seemed persuading Tiamat to give up was not so easy after all. At this moment, his sleeve was suddenly gently grasped. Asher looked up and saw Tiamat's lips slightly parted, her cross-shaped pupils seemingly containing a look of uneasiness. Are you leaving here? Don't leave me. We'll have nightmares. Hate nightmares, will you stay with me? She was strong enough to destroy the world, yet at this moment, she was as fragile and helpless as a little girl. Asher looked at Tiamat with a complicated expression and softly said, Don't worry. I won't leave here. Tiamat gently cried out a couple of times, then reached out and pulled Asher back into her embrace, looking as if she were holding a pillow. Asher was too lazy to struggle this time. He gazed up at the sky, silently pondering other matters. What should he do now? Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 304, Chapter 304, Nightmare Descends. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. Unconsciously, another week had passed. Even if Asher wanted to know what was happening outside, there was nothing he could do. He had no means of communication here. Every day, besides chatting with Tiamat, referred to as Tima, he slept with her. He couldn't do anything else. I wonder what's going on in reality right now, and if that Merlin guy has forgotten about me. Asher sat on a rock by the sea, staring blankly at the ocean, filled with resentment. He felt he had been tricked. Merlin was running around outside, while he was stuck here with Tiamat. That alone would have been fine, but whenever Tiamat felt sleepy, she would call Asher to her side, treating him like a pillow, rubbing her face against him and licking him with her tongue, completely treating him like a child. Besides, even with a child, a mother usually wouldn't be that intimate, would she? All in all, Asher had spent the past few days experiencing this. Unknowingly, day had once again turned into evening. Asher had been chatting with Tiamat since waking up that morning, and now, it was finally noon, and he had gotten a bit of rest time, so he sat by the sea for a while. Boom. At that moment, a pillar of water suddenly erupted from behind him without warning. Asher dodged it with extreme speed. This wasn't the first time he had encountered this in the past few days. According to Tiamat's intentions, this was her playing a game with him. From a distance, a beautiful song echoed again. 3 pillars of water rose from the sea, surging towards Asher. It's useless. As long as I'm careful, attacks of this level won't hit me. Asher easily dodged the attacks. As he said, such attacks were already useless to him. But Tiamat showed no signs of hurry, gazing calmly at Asher, looking gentle. Then, in the next second, she gently parted her lips. The sound seemed to travel from here to the ends of the sea. A hazy mist enveloped the entire sea, and the surface was calm, without a single ripple. Strange, did she give up, mother? Asher couldn't help but ask. Boom. Almost the instant the words fell, countless splashes of water erupted. Hundreds of water pillars surged from the sea, like 100 water dragons sweeping in from all directions, quickly surrounding Asher. Asher dodged several water pillars with extremely agile speed, and then he was struck in the back by several water pillars, sent uncontrollably flying backward, and then fell heavily into the seawater. Despite the seawater cushioning the impact, Asher still felt very uncomfortable. For some reason, he could even feel pain in the dream. Tiamat really doesn't know her own strength when she plays. Asher grumbled inwardly, spitting out the seawater he had accidentally swallowed. The waves surged, and the seawater lifted Asher from the sea, then carried him before Tiamat. She reached out and pulled Asher back into her embrace, murmuring apologies, clearly realizing that her little game had caused her child pain. Asher merely smiled and softly said, "It's not your fault, you wouldn't know how much force is considered light when playing, would you?" After all, for an entity of her caliber, it was quite normal for her to not be able to control her power to the minimum. Or rather, what Tiamat considered a minimal attack probably had quite formidable destructive power. When I wake up, I'll create companions for you, then we can play together." Asher froze, and the image of those strangely shaped new humans flashed in his mind. He immediately shook his head and said, "I don't like companions, you don't need to create them." Why don't you like companions? They're too ugly, Asher said. The humans I create are all very beautiful." Tiamat gestured as she spoke, and seawater was molded into the shape of new humans out of thin air. Asher looked at the so-called new humans. They seemed to have no eyes, only a mouth, and their insect-like legs resembled sharp blades. No matter how he looked at them, they had nothing to do with humans. Is Tiamat's aesthetic bad, or is my aesthetic problematic? Asher couldn't help but start questioning life. You don't like it? Asher thought for a moment, nodded, and said, "I only like mother." To prevent her from creating those chaotic new humans, he had thrown caution to the wind. In short, he'd say whatever it took to make progress. Though some of his words were indeed genuine thoughts hidden deep in Asher's heart. Upon hearing Asher's words, Tiamat's movements noticeably slowed. The new human she had just molded transformed back into seawater and fell into the ocean. Then, she held Asher even tighter. This mother is a bit too affectionate. Asher grumbled inwardly, but ultimately couldn't bring himself to push her away again. He would just endure it for now. Speaking of which, did saying that make her stop creating new humans? Asher secretly observed Tiamat, but couldn't discern anything from her expression. Nevertheless, this was a good thing. At least from Tiamat's current state, stabilizing her emotions shouldn't be an issue. What are you thinking? Asher came back to his senses, shook his head, and smiled, "Just zoning out for a bit, it's nothing." Tiamat gently stroked Asher's face and called out again, "Sleep." After saying that, she stopped talking, just gazing quietly at Asher. It had been like this for the past few days. Tiamat would only rest after Asher had fallen asleep, so Asher had mostly gotten used to it. Every day, he would wake up and watch Tiamat in a daze. Once she woke up, he could leave her embrace and walk around to stretch his limbs, only to be called back to her side to sleep again a short while later. "Okay, let's sleep," Asher said. Night gradually descended, waves surged layer by layer, crashing against the rocks, and then quietly receding. It was as if the whole world had fallen silent. At that moment, a faint cracking sound echoed. Tiamat's eyes snapped open, looking in a certain direction. A crack appeared on the vast land, followed by a second and a third. Her mouth was slightly agape, as if she wanted to make a sound, but after glancing down at Asher, she forcibly held it back. The sky grew darker, as if heavy black clouds shrouded the firmament, making one's mood feel oppressed. Boom. A thunderclap sounded under the dream's night sky. Almost at that instant, Asher's eyes snapped open. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong. Chapter 305, Chapter 305, I really want to love this world. Fire, you can find 40 chapters ahead here. Also other exciting fanfic available. Fire. A warm embrace enveloped Asher. Tiamat still sat quietly, cross-legged by the shore. Her size was much smaller than when she first appeared, but in the darkness, her red cross-shaped pupils remained bright, their gaze captivating. However, her gaze wasn't intentionally meant to inspire fear, her eyes had always been like this. The current Tiamat was afraid of something. Perhaps sensing that the young man in her embrace had been woken by the thunder, her hand gently tightened, pulling Asher closer. She continuously stroked his head, as if comforting him. She truly resembled a wounded animal mother, utterly terrified but still constantly comforting her child. "It's okay, it's just thunder, nothing will happen, don't worry." Asher cautiously reached out for Tiamat's hand, gently holding it, while observing her expression. Small animals are very sensitive when injured. If someone not particularly close were to reach out rashly, they might even get severely bitten. Asher didn't know if he was considered close to Tiamat right now, so his movements were extremely cautious. He held her soft, small hand, clearly feeling it trembling slightly, as if she were afraid of something. "It's okay, there's no one else here, it's all right," Asher said again softly, in a calm tone. Tiamat looked down at him and gently let out a sound. It was this kind of weather back then when the gods attacked her, that's what she said. "There are no gods now, and no one will harm you, everything is over." Asher gently cupped her hand, looking into her eyes and saying again, "Everyone respects you." "Yes, everything has passed, nothing will happen now," Asher said softly again. Tiamat gazed at Asher, staring into his eyes, dark and with a hint of golden light. Then, she leaned down slightly, slowly wrapping her arms around Asher's neck, her entire body pressing against his. However, her body was still too large to fully feel the warmth of her child, so her size slowly shrunk further, until finally, she was only slightly larger than Asher. She had no intention of letting go, holding Asher's neck tightly. Asher could only return the embrace, stroking her scattered cyan hair. The seawater surged, and a few drops of water splashed onto Asher's face. Tiamat extended her soft, small tongue and licked away the water droplets from his face. Then, she leaned close to his ear and said in a very faint voice, Everyone, and gods, are all enemies, they want to kill me." "No, no one wants to kill you now. Everyone doesn't dislike you," Asher replied in an equally faint voice. He didn't want to break this tranquility. Tiamat stopped speaking, merely looking up at the night sky, watching the rolling thunder and lightning, perhaps in a daze, or perhaps pondering something. Are you asking me what the outside world is like now?" Asher asked. Tiamat gently hummed. Asher thought for a moment and then said, "It's probably very different from the era you lived in. Humans in this era live by farming and herding, which is self-sufficient. Then, humans, using their wisdom, created many things. Technology is getting better and better, and humans have more choices. There are devices that can communicate no matter how far apart, and many other high-tech machines. Where did all the gods go?" "The gods later disappeared," Asher said. "But humans didn't rely on gods, they created everything I just mentioned with their own hands." Very impressive. Tiamat didn't give up asking there, she continued to inquire about more things, from the current era to the future. She didn't seem to wonder why Asher knew how future technology would develop, or perhaps she just didn't care about such things. Clearly, Tiamat had been sleeping in the imaginary space for a very long time, unaware of anything outside. She simply believed that since the gods attacked her then, the humans created by the gods would also attack her. So that's what the world became, this is the result of human wisdom, Asher said again. I like the humans you speak of very much, then isn't that great? Tiamat stopped speaking, merely looking up at the night sky and the vast sea in the distance. But there's no place for me there. Tiamat had always been sleeping in that imaginary space, a place where no existence could enter. Like a tiny creature sealed in a box, until one day the box was opened, and she awoke from her long slumber. But humans would be afraid of her, because she was both the progenitor goddess and the evil of humanity. So, she wanted to create new humans. Only new humans wouldn't hate her. It's okay. Asher shook his head and said softly. The outside world, there's no place for me, it's okay, he said again. Humans will definitely be afraid of me, perhaps so. Asher stopped arguing, raised his hand, stroked her head, and said seriously, this is very normal. You are the progenitor goddess, everyone will revere you, even fear you, but even so, it's okay. A confused sound came from her mouth. Asher simply broke free from Tiamat's embrace. Then, under her bewildered gaze, he put one arm around her neck and gently pressed her head into his chest. No one can make anyone like them. Even if humans don't like you, but at least, I'm still here, he said softly. Tiamat slowly looked up. Under the night sky, dark clouds rolled, and streaks of lightning flickered within the clouds. There was no light on the coast, but her eyes were brighter than ever. She gazed at Asher with a bewildered look, then slowly, her eyes gradually became clear. She reached out and cupped Asher's face. Tiamat's beautiful face slowly drew closer to Asher. She stared intently into Asher's eyes. Though it was only a small distance, the approach felt exceptionally long. The distance grew closer, yet she clearly felt more and more uneasy. This was the first time she had actively approached a human, or rather, a god with a more intimate relationship. She didn't seem to have considered what would happen if Asher were to escape at that moment. But Asher remained motionless, simply meeting her gaze, unable to look away. And so, he watched as Tiamat's distance from him closed little by little, until finally, their lips met. The sound of thunder vanished, and the cracked earth silently merged back together, as if the entire world had returned to silence. Tangerine boost this fanfic. Tangerine. Every 350 power stones gets 2 bonus chapters. Rocket. Want faster updates? Show your support by dropping power stones, leaving reviews, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps the story going strong.